A woman with bones in her hair presses him to her chest and whispers a name he doesn't know. Kenji. My Kenji. Don't leave. He pries his eyelids open and sees a tattoo of a fang stretching across her cheek, and he realizes three things at once. This isn't his body. This isn't his world. And outside, a human leg is roasting over a bonfire. First comes the pain. Sharp. It's as if someone has cut open his chest and stuffed it with burning coals. His lungs are on fire. His mouth tastes of dirt and blood. He tries to breathe and chokes on a cough. His fingers scrape at the wet mat. He doesn't remember his name. He knows only one thing. He is dying. Someone's hands grab him by the shoulders and press him against hot skin. The woman smells of smoke, rancid fat, and old dried blood. She sways and whispers in a language he has never heard before. But he understands every word. He raises his hand. The hand is thin, childlike, skin and bones. On his right side is a scar from a healed spear wound. This isn't his body. He's 26. He's a graduate student. He was walking out of the lab. Wet asphalt, a blow, darkness. And now he lies in a stranger's body in a strange world, and a woman with bones in her hair calls him her son. A drum beats nearby, dull, like the pulse of a sick animal. Someone outside is screaming, not in pain, with excitement, with laughter. He turns his head toward the hole in the wall and sees a bonfire, and on a long skewer over the fire, a human leg is roasting, from the knee to the foot. Fat drips into the flames and sizzles. Men, women, and children sit around it. They're laughing, waiting for it to roast through. He squints. His heart is pounding so hard his ribs are shaking. He wants to wake up. He wants to go back to the wet asphalt and bang his temple against it one more time. Anything but this. But his body won't obey, and his mother keeps rocking him and whispering, "Kenji, hang in there." And then he grits his teeth and orders himself to think. You're a chemist. The body is rubbish. The world is rubbish. But your mind works. Look, a tribe, the Stone Age, ritual cannibalism. So there's a structure, a chief, a shaman, a hierarchy, a woman, a mother. She loves her son. Her son is sick. The wheezing and fever mean pneumonia. Without antibiotics, that's a death sentence here. He coughs again, blood on his lips. The mother wipes it away with her black palm. That hand has never been washed in her life. Because here, they don't know what washing is. And then it clicks in his head. Ash, fat, water, soda ash, saponification, third-year course, lab number 6. He used to laugh back then. Why would a chemist need to make soap? Then, he lies in the darkness and listens to the sizzle of fat on the fire. He can't get up, can't run, can't fight. But he knows what soap is, and boiled water, and why people stop dying if they wash their hands before eating. In this world, such knowledge is worth more than 1,000 coins, if they let him live long enough to put it to use. Morning comes with pain. He hasn't slept. The tribe is making noise behind the wall, and the words form in his mind on their own. His body remembers what his brain does not. His mother's name is Naya, a hunter's widow. The fang tattoo means her husband died on a hunt. A widow with a sick child is at the very bottom. Below her are only slaves and those designated for the feast. And on the other side of the wall, 2 men are arguing over who will get the rib section. They're not talking about the beast. He pushes that thought aside. Right now, the task is simple. Don't die today. Don't die tomorrow. By noon, the heat subsides. Naya brings water in a bowl. murky, with fibers in it. He knows this water is undrinkable. It contains that very red rot that's killing children by the dozens. But he points to the fire, to the water, to his throat. There's no word for germ in this language, no word for disease in the sense he means it. Here, disease is the wrath of the spirits. Naya frowns but sets the bowl on the coals. She always does what her son asks. The water comes to a boil. He waits. Let everything that lives in there die. And he drinks the first consciously boiled water in the history of this world. On the third day, he calls his mother over and asks for ash, fat, clean water from the stream. She looks at him as if he were a dying man in a delirium. Let him play. If these are his last days, let him do whatever he wants. He pours the ash into a bowl. He pours water over it. It's leaf ash. It contains potassium. Lye will form. He strains the murky, caustic liquid through a rag. It stings his fingers. It's working. He adds rendered fat. He sets it over the coals. Now to stir. An hour, 2, 3. His hands are too weak, so he places a stick in Naya's hand. She stirs it, without asking, just because her son asked. By evening, a gray, slippery mass is floating in the pot. It smells strange. It looks like trash. He stands up. His legs buckle. He staggers toward the stream. 20 steps. For him, it's a marathon. He sits down on a rock. He takes his mother's black hand, cracked and calloused. The dirt has seeped so deep, it seems like part of her skin. He wets the gray lump and rubs. The dirt sloughs off. Brown water runs down her fingers. And beneath it, her skin emerges. 3 shades lighter. Alive. Clean. Naya looks at her hand, at skin she's never seen before, and weeps silently. Her son, who was supposed to have died 3 days ago, is scraping the dirt from her skin. Without sand, without prayer, just a gray lump of something. An hour later, people are standing by the hut. 3, then 10, then more. They are silent and look at Naya's hands. Then at the gray piece. Then at the boy who is barely breathing against the wall. That's how they look at something that defies comprehension. On the 4th day, an old man arrives. Oro, the shaman of the Red Fangs. Around his neck is a necklace made of human fingers. His eyes are sharp as a lizard's. He sits down across from him and asks, "Which spirit did you speak to in order to remove the filth from your skin?" And here lies the trap. The shaman will say the boy is possessed, and they'll kill him by morning. He'll say the spirits speak through him, and the boy will fall under his power. Both options are bad. Artem licks his lips and replies, "I didn't speak to the spirits. I looked at the ashes, the fat, and the water, and saw that they would become something else if combined correctly. Anyone could do it. No spirits needed." Oro stands up. At the threshold, he tosses it aside without looking back. The boy says strange things, but his mother's hands are clean. Oro will think it over, and he leaves. The first test is passed. On the 7th day, the 4 women he had ordered to boil water for the dying children return. One is carrying a boy of about 3. 3 days ago, he was dying. Now he's gnawing on a stick. His eyes are clear. He has no fever. The woman places a piece of smoked meat in front of Artem, her only meal for today, and bows. Not as she would to a shaman, not as she would to a chief, as she would to someone who has not yet earned such a bow. He pushes the meat aside. He asks for the largest clay pot to be brought, for salt. There is no salt in the tribe. They eat unsalted food, and their bodies are falling apart. If he can distill white crystals from the stream, it will be the 3rd blow, after which they will leave him alone. He hopes so, because Chief Kano's heir was already standing in the doorway of his hut, promising to decide for himself what to do with a brother who's overstepping his bounds. And in 2 full moons, there will be the great feast of Isu, at which the weakest are sacrificed. He is first on the list. He needs to become indispensable so quickly that killing him would cost more than keeping him alive. He lies on a mat and stares at the hole in the ceiling. A foreign sky hangs over the jungle, purple at the edges, and the sun, white, huge, motionless, like an eye that never blinks. He stares at it for a long time, and it seems to him that the sun is staring back. The pot was crooked. Its walls were uneven. One side was thinner than the other, but it was big, and it didn't leak. That was enough. Artem asked Naya to help him get to the stream. 20 steps that felt like a kilometer every single time. His lungs wheezed. His heart pounded somewhere in his throat. But he made it. He filled the pot with water, set it on the rocks next to the hut, built a fire beneath it, and waited. The water boiled, steam rose. He tossed in some more firewood. More. More. Naya watched. She had already gotten used to her son doing strange things with water and fire. She no longer asked why. She just helped. The water boiled away slowly. Artem added more. He boiled it again. He added more water again. It was the most tedious and slowest way to extract salt from fresh water, but the stream flowed down from the hills. Its water contained minerals, potassium, sodium, just a little. But if he boiled off enough water, a sediment would remain at the bottom, white, slightly salty. Not pure sodium chloride, of course, a mixture. But for people who'd never tasted salt before, it would be a revelation. He boiled the water for 3 days. Naya carried firewood. By the end of the second day, she was joined by the woman whose child he'd saved. Her name was Tisa, small, quiet, with a broken nose and hands stronger than those of many hunters. She didn't ask what the boy was doing. She'd seen the result with the water and simply came to help. On the third day of boiling, the pot cracked. Artem looked at the shattered clay and the puddle of murky water seeping into the ground, and felt something dark rising inside him. 3 days of work, firewood, strength he didn't even have, all down the drain. He clenched his fists. His fingernails dug into his palms. His body trembled with weakness and anger. Naya approached quietly. She placed her hand on his head, just as she used to when Kenji was little. He inhaled. He exhaled. All right, another pot. But first, he needed a pot that wouldn't crack. That meant he needed decent clay and a proper firing. That meant he needed a kiln. He lay on the mat and thought. A kiln is a pit in the ground lined with stones. He knew that. But the pit had to be dug. The stones had to be hauled. He couldn't do either. He needed hands. Someone else's hands. The next morning, he asked Naya to call Tisa and another woman, Maro, an old woman, with a bad back that constantly made her double over in pain. Artem had seen how she walked. A classic spinal misalignment. On Earth, that's treated with manual therapy. Here, it's treated the same way, if you know what to do. When Maro arrived, he asked her to lie face down. She looked at Naya. Naya nodded. Maro lay down. Artem clenched his teeth and knelt down beside her. His hands trembled with weakness. He felt along her spine. He found the misalignment, the third lumbar vertebra, a standard case. He placed his hands on her. He applied pressure. Abruptly, a crack. Maro cried out. Then she froze. Then she slowly sat up. Then she stood up. Then she straightened up. Completely. For the first time in 4 years. She stood there, blinking. She touched her back. She turned to the left, to the right. There was no pain. She looked at Artem, at the skinny boy who was lying on the ground, gasping for air after a single effort. And something appeared in Morrow's eyes. Not gratitude. There was no word for gratitude in this world. Something more ancient. Duty. Morrow dug a hole for the stove until sunset. Tisa and two other women, who had come to watch and stayed, helped her. Artem sat nearby and gave instructions. Deeper, wider. Use these flat stones. At the bottom. Along the walls, too. Fill the cracks with clay. This one, the yellow one. It holds the heat better. By evening, the pit was ready. Not perfect. Rough, but functional. He fired the first pot the next day. Thick walls. He'd made Tisa mix the clay with fine sand. That increases heat resistance. Third year, materials science. Back then, he'd been too lazy to go to lectures. Now, every missed lecture felt like a knocked-out tooth. The pot turned out ugly but sturdy. He tapped it with his knuckles. A ringing sound. A good firing. It won't crack. He began the evaporation process again. This time, he asked Naya to collect water not from the stream, but from a small lake on the edge of the village. The water there is stagnant. The mineral content is higher. There will be more sediment. 4 days. The fire burned around the clock. Tisa and Morrow took turns adding firewood. Naya kept adding water. Artem lay nearby and watched. Sometimes he was seized by a cough so severe that his vision went dark. At those moments, Naya would silently wipe the blood from his lips and return to the pot. She didn't cry anymore. She worked. On the 5th day, a residue remained at the bottom of the pot, a thin layer, grayish-white. Artem scraped it out with an obsidian knife. He poured it onto a flat stone. He crushed the clumps. The result was a handful of powder, fine, almost white. He licked his finger. Then the powder. Salty, slightly bitter, not pure salt, potassium, magnesium, all mixed together. But salty. His heart beat faster. He poured a pinch into his palm and held it out to Naya. She looked at him suspiciously. He nodded. Try it. She licked it and froze. Her eyes widened. She licked it again and again. She didn't know the word salt, but her body knew that taste. Her body was screaming. This is what she needed. This was what she'd needed her whole life. She looked at Artem, then at the pot, then at the white powder on the stone, and she ran off. He didn't have time to stop her. 10 minutes later, she returned with Tisa, Morrow, and 5 other women, and one by one, they all tasted the white powder from the rock and froze with the same expression. Shock. Recognition. Hunger. They wanted more. Everyone wanted more. By noon, half the tribe knew about salt. By evening, a crowd had gathered again outside Naya's hut. A silent crowd. Silent. They stared at the stone on which a handful of white powder lay. To them, it was a miracle. The boy who used to scrape dirt from their skin was now extracting flavor from water. Artem looked at them and thought, 1 handful of salt, 5 days' work. That's enough for a single serving of meat for 1 person. He needed another source. A stream is too slow. He needs salt flats, or seawater, or a mineral spring, something with a high concentration. He asked Naya, is there a place where the ground is white, where a white film remains on the rocks, where the water tastes bitter or strange? Naya thought for a moment. Then she nodded. A 3-day journey south. At the foot of the Red Hills. There's a lake there. The water in it is dead. Animals don't drink from it. Birds don't land there. The tribe calls it the Eye of Isu and gives it a wide berth. Artem smiled. A salt lake. A mineral lake. Concentrated brine. It's not a handful. It's kilograms. Tons. but a 3-day journey. That's impossible for him. He wouldn't make it even halfway through the day. He needs someone strong, someone he trusts. He doesn't have anyone like that. Not yet, anyway. The next morning, something happened that he hadn't expected. The chief came to the hut. Maruo. Old, gray-haired, tall even at his age. His hands were scarred from dozens of battles. Around his neck was a necklace of fangs, not human ones, but leopards. He had killed a leopard with his bare hands when he was 16. The whole tribe knew about it. That was his story, his right to be chief. Maruo entered the hut and sat down, silently. Naya pressed herself against the wall. The chief didn't visit widows. The chief didn't visit the sick. The chief summoned people to him. If he came on his own, it meant something important. Maruo looked at Artem for a long time. Then he held out his hand, an open palm. Artem understood. He poured a pinch of salt into the chief's palm. Maruo raised it to his face. He sniffed it. He licked it. He froze. Just like Naya. Just like everyone else. His body recognized what it wanted. Maruo clenched his fist. He looked at the boy and asked, "You can do a lot." Artem replied, "I can, if they give me people to help me, and if they let me live until the next full moon." Maruo didn't blink. He understood. The boy was talking about Pira Isa, about the list of the weak, about the stone on which they're slaughtered. The chief stood up. He stood there for a moment. Then he said briefly, "The boy will live until the next full moon. After that, Maruo will decide." And he left. Naya exhaled. Artem lay there, counting. That morning, he drew up a plan. 23 days. Every day had to yield a result. Not theory, a result. Something you could touch, lick, smell, smear on a wound. These people don't believe in words. They believe in hands. Day 1 of the new count. Willow bark. He asked Naya about the trees by the river. Slender, flexible, with long leaves. She nodded. There are some like that. Children break off branches to play with. He asked her to bring some bark. Lots of bark. Thick, from old trees. Naya left and returned 2 hours later with an armful. Artem examined it. It smells right. A slightly bitter smell. It's willow or something very similar. Salicylic acid. Natural aspirin. An antipyretic and anti-inflammatory. First-year pharmacology. He remembered how the professor had said that before aspirin was invented, people had been chewing willow bark for thousands of years. And that it worked. He broke off a piece, chewed it. Bitter. Very bitter. His tongue went numb. He swallowed it. An hour later, the fever that had been plaguing him for 2 weeks had subsided slightly. Just a little. But he could feel the difference. It works. He crushed the bark with a stone, ground it into a coarse powder, poured hot water over it. The result was a bitter, dark decoction. He drank it 3 times a day. By the 3rd day, his fever had dropped enough that he could stand without support. His lungs were still wheezing. The cough hadn't gone away, but the fever was receding. His body got a breather. For the first time in ages, he was able to walk 50 steps from the hut. The world around him turned out to be more than just a hole in the wall. The village of Red Fangs consisted of 3 dozen huts scattered around a central clearing. In the clearing lay a stone. Large, flat, darkened by old blood. The stone of Isu. The altar. Artem looked at it and looked away. Surrounding the village was a wall of sharpened stakes. Not very high, more of a boundary marker than a defense. Beyond the wall lay the jungle. Dense, dark, buzzing with insects, the smell of rot, flowers, and wet earth. He counted about 180 people, maybe 200. About 40 men were hunters. There were more women. There were many children, but half of them had swollen bellies and pus-filled eyes. They were sick, almost all of them. Red rot, parasites, infections, vitamin deficiency. He looked at the children, and his graduate student's mind automatically made diagnoses. Rickets, scurvy, anemia, skin infections, worms. They need more than just boiled water. They need a system, cleanliness, food with vitamins, salt, medicine. They need the 19th century in 23 days. He returned to the hut. His legs were shaking, but his mind was working. He called for Naya, Tisa, Maro, and asked them to find 2 more people. People who had nothing to lose. People no one listened to. People considered useless. Tisa brought 2. Old Tharu, a hunter in the past, now lame. His leg was swollen. His joints were swollen. Gout, or arthritis. Tharu was of no use to the tribe. They tolerated him out of respect for his past merits. And a girl, skinny, about 13 years old, with a burn scar on her left cheek. An old burn. Her eyes were sharp, alert, like those of a beast accustomed to being beaten. Lena. Artem looked at her. She looked at him. She didn't look away. Most of the children in the village lowered their eyes in front of adults, in front of anyone older and stronger. Lena didn't. He remembered that. He gathered them in front of the hut, 6 of them. Naya, Tisa, Maro, Tharu, Lena, and himself. 6 people nobody needed. He began to speak, slowly, in simple words. He explained that the water from the stream was making the children sick, that if they boiled the water, the children would stop getting sick. He explained that ash and fat produce a substance that removes dirt, that dirt isn't just dirt. It harbors something that kills. He didn't use the word bacteria. He said little worms, so small that the eye can't see them. But they're there. They're in the water, on your hands, on your food, and when they get inside your body, they devour it from the inside. Boiling water kills them. Soap washes them away. Tharu snorted. Maro was silent. Tisa looked at her clean hands. Lena listened without blinking. He continued. He explained that the earth can provide food, not hunting, the earth. If you plant the seeds of certain plants in it and water them, after a while, food will grow, lots of food. More than a single hunter can bring back in a week. Tharu snorted again, but more quietly this time. Artem knew he sounded like a madman, a boy in a delirium, claiming that dirt is alive and the earth feeds us. But he had already shown them soap, and water, and salt. 3 impossible things in 2 weeks. Maybe the 4th would turn out to be true too. He divided up the tasks. Naya continues to make soap. He taught her the proportions. 3 handfuls of ash to 1 handful of fat. Boil until it thickens. She remembered. Tisa boils water and distributes it to the mothers of sick children. Every day, without exception. Maro gathers willow bark and makes a decoction according to his recipe. 2 handfuls of bark to a pot of water. Boil until the decoction turns dark. Give the patients 3 sips in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Tharu. Artem looked at his swollen leg. He knelt down. He felt it. Tharu hissed in pain. The joint is hot. There's fluid inside. Inflammation. He needs cold, rest, and the willow decoction to drink. And a tight bandage to immobilize the joint. He tore off a piece of cloth and tightly wrapped Tharu's knee. The old man looked at his leg, bandaged, immobilized. The pain had already lessened simply from the pressure. He looked at the boy, and the same thing flashed in his eyes as in Maro's. Duty. Tharu was given a task, to sit by the pot of salt, to stoke the fire, to watch the evaporation. He couldn't walk far, but he could sit and keep watch. That left Lena. Artem looked at her, the girl with the scorched cheek who wouldn't look away. He asked, "You have a good memory." It wasn't a question. He'd seen how she listened, how her eyes moved from his hands to the pot, to the fire, to the ashes. She wasn't just watching, she was memorizing the sequence. Lena replied briefly, "Yes." He nodded. "Then you'll memorize everything I do. Every step, every handful, every order. If I die tomorrow, you'll have to repeat it." Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, without fear, without surprise, as if she'd been waiting for someone to finally tell her that she was needed. Day 4 of the new count. Artem set to work in the garden. A wild plant resembling a sweet potato grew around the village. The tubers were bitter. The tribe didn't eat them. But Artem knew the bitterness could be removed by soaking them. 2 days in running water. He asked Tisa to dig up 10 tubers and place them in the stream, tying them to a rock with a vine. 2 days later, he retrieved them. He cut them open. The flesh had turned from yellow-brown to white. He tasted it. It had a starchy flavor, not bitter. Edible. He boiled the tubers in a pot. He mashed them. He added a pinch of his precious salt. The result was something like porridge, bland, unappealing, but edible. He let Lena try some. She chewed slowly, swallowed. Then she looked at him and said, "This is good. It's filling." He nodded. A single tuber the size of a fist was just as filling as a piece of meat. But you didn't have to hunt for the tubers. You didn't have to kill anything. No need to risk your life hunting. You can grow them. If you plant tuber cuttings in loose soil near water, new ones will grow in 2 or 3 moons, more than you planted. He asked Tisa to plant 5 cuttings in the clearing by the stream. Loose soil, sun, water nearby. Mark the spot with stones, leave it alone. Tisa did as she was told. Artem understood that it would take time to see results, 2 or 3 months. But if he survived, he would show them that the earth provides sustenance. That would change everything. A tribe of hunters that would begin to grow their own food. The first step from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled one. Day 6. Oren came to the hut. Artem knew about her from the body's memories. The daughter of the shaman Oro, 17 years old, tall, with a long black braid down to her waist. She was the only woman in the tribe allowed to know about herbs, because her father had taught her. She came with a bundle of plants. She placed them in front of him. She didn't say a word. Artem looked at the plants. He touched them. He sniffed them. He recognized one, plantain, or a local variety. Wide leaves. Its sap heals wounds, an antiseptic. Another one, small flowers, a sharp scent, mint, or something similar. He didn't recognize the third one. He looked at Oren. She stood there, waiting. Her face was calm. Her eyes were attentive. She wasn't afraid of him. She'd come to check on him. He understood that. The shaman Oro had sent his daughter. Or maybe not. Maybe she'd come on her own. But she'd come with herbs, as if to ask, "Do you know what these are?" He pointed to the plantain and said, "This leaf, if you crush it and apply it to the wound, the pus will drain away. The wound will heal faster." Oren tilted her head slightly. He knows. He pointed to the mint. "This one, if you steep it in hot water and breathe in the steam, your chest will feel clearer. Your cough will be gentler." He'll try it himself today. Oren nodded. He pointed to the third plant. "I don't know what this is." "Tell me." Oren was silent. 1 second, 2, 3. Then she spoke, a quiet voice, low for a woman. "It's the root of the toma. If you boil it and drink the decoction, a woman won't get pregnant. If you grind it up and put it on a wound, the pain will subside. If you eat a lot of it, You'll die. Artem listened. A contraceptive, an anesthetic, and a poison, all in one plant. Maybe an alkaloid. Something from the nightshade family. He asked, "Do you know any more plants like this?" Orn replied, "My father knows 43 plants. I know 31. Artem almost laughed. 31. A Stone Age pharmacopoeia in one girl's head. It was a treasure. He said, "I want to learn all 31, every single one. What it does, how much to give, when it's dangerous. In exchange, I'll show you what I know. Soap, salt, boiling, bark decoctions, everything." Oren looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down. She placed her hands on her knees and began to tell him. They sat there until dark. Artem listened and memorized. Lena sat beside him and memorized it all as well. 31 plants. Poisons, medicines, painkillers, emetics, laxatives, wound healing agents, hallucinogens for rituals, a sleeping potion made from the root of a white flower, an ointment for burns made from the sap of a thick stem, a powder for fever made from the dried bark of a red tree. The Stone Age knew more than he'd thought. These people weren't stupid. They were uneducated. There's a huge difference. By nightfall, Artem was lying on a mat, his brain buzzing with information. 31 plants, plus everything he remembered from college, if he could combine them, if he could merge their knowledge with his own. Plantain ointment plus distilled alcohol, a pain-relieving root plus the right dosage, antiseptic plus boiling. This isn't the Stone Age anymore. It isn't the 19th century yet, but it's a step, a huge step. That night, he didn't dream. He slept soundly for the first time since waking up in this body. The willow decoction brought down his fever. The tuber porridge filled him up, and knowledge lay right beside him. New, foreign, his. The 10th day of the new count, 13 days until the full moon. Artem woke up and realized he could breathe more deeply than yesterday. His lungs were still wheezing, but less so. His cortex was working. His body was beginning to fight back. He stepped out of the hut and saw that the world around him had changed. Not around him. 13 days. Artem counted each one. On the 11th day of the new count, what he had feared came to pass. The child of the hunter Garo fell ill. Not just any hunter, the best. Garo brought back more meat than any two others combined. Garo had a vote on the council. Garo sat next to the chief at the feast. His son, a 3-year-old boy named Riku, woke up with a high fever and bloody diarrhea. Red rot. Artem found out about it from Tisa. She had run to the hut that morning, her eyes wide with shock. Riku's mother had taken the child to the shaman. Oro performed the ritual. He burned herbs. He smeared the boy's stomach with rooster's blood. He recited a prayer to Ishu. Standard procedure. Standard result. Nothing. The child was burning up. Artem clenched his teeth. He couldn't go to Garo's hut and offer to help. That would be an insult to the shaman. A direct challenge. Oro could declare him possessed by an evil spirit, and then the chief's 23 days would be worth nothing. He sat and waited. That was the hardest part. Knowing that a child was dying 50 paces away from you. Knowing that you have a cure. Boiled water, willow decoction, salt and water for rehydration. And not being able to do anything because of politics. Because of the hierarchy. Because the world is arranged so that a single old shaman with a necklace made of fingers stands between the boy and death. On the second day of his illness, Riku's condition worsened. Artem heard his mother crying. A high-pitched, thin wail, like that of a wounded beast. Garo stood by the shaman's hut and waited, patiently, just as he was used to waiting while hunting. Oro was performing a new ritual. He was cauterizing the soles of the boy's feet. This was supposed to drive out the spirit. Artem heard the child scream, and his own hands trembled. He hated this world, at that moment, with all his heart. On the third day, a woman came to Artem's hut. Not Riku's mother, another woman, the wife of the second hunter, quietly, glancing around. She said she'd heard about the water, about boiling it, about the children who had recovered. She said that Riku's mother wanted to try it, but she was afraid of the shaman. Artem understood. They came in secret, at night. Riku's mother brought the boy wrapped in a pelt. Artem examined him by the light of the embers. Bad. Dehydration. Sunken eyes. His skin was dry. His lips were chapped. He had a high fever. But the child was alive. He was still alive. Artem worked quickly. Boiled water. Let it cool. Add salt. A pinch. Stir. In small sips. 1 spoonful at a time. Every few minutes. Don't rush. His stomach might not handle it if you pour it all in at once. Naya helped. Tisa helped. Riku's mother held her son and fed him the salt water from a wooden spoon. The boy drank. A sip. Another sip. He didn't throw it up. Good. Artem gave him some willow bark decoction. Just a little. The child is small. A quarter of what an adult would drink. It's bitter. Riku grimaced, but he swallowed it. Now they had to wait. His mother carried the child back before dawn. No one saw them. In the morning, Artem sat by the hut and pretended nothing had happened. Lena was drawing symbols. Tharu was watching the salt evaporate. A normal day. Inside, Artem was counting the hours. The following night, his mother brought Riku back again. He was feeling better. The fever had subsided slightly. The diarrhea had eased. His eyes were clearer. Artem gave him more salt water and herbal tea, and a wet cloth wrapped around his forehead to bring down the fever. A simple thing. Elementary. Every mother on earth knows this. Here, it was a revelation. On the third night, Riku sat in his mother's arms, reaching toward the fire. Alive. Curious. His cheeks were still sunken, but his eyes were clear. The fever was gone. The diarrhea had stopped. His mother held him close and rocked back and forth. She looked at Artem and opened her mouth. But she couldn't say a word. There were no words. Artem nodded. Go. Don't tell anyone you came here. She left. In the morning, Garo stood in front of the shaman's hut and thanked Oro for the spirits having heard his prayer. Riku ran alongside him. Alive! Oro accepted the thanks. Artem saw this from his hut, and he saw how Oro turned his head for a second and looked in his direction. A single glance, a brief one. The shaman knew. He couldn't have not known. The boy had recovered too quickly after 3 days of a hopeless ritual. That doesn't happen. Someone had intervened. Oro knew. And he kept quiet. Artem remembered that. The shaman kept quiet. That meant something. Maybe Oro wasn't as simple as he seemed. Maybe he wasn't an enemy. Not yet. Day 14 of the new count. 9 days until the full moon. Artem decided it was time to take the next step. Smoking meat. The tribe didn't know how to preserve food for more than 2 or 3 days. They roasted the meat and ate it right away. Whatever wasn't eaten rotted. During a good hunting season, the meat would run out. In times of famine, they ate bark and larvae. A smokehouse solved this problem. Smoked meat keeps for weeks, for months if done correctly. This meant a stockpile, insurance against hunger. It meant the tribe didn't have to hunt every day. Hunters could rest or do other things, like building, for example, or learning. He asked Thara and Maro to dig a pit, not very deep, 1/2 meter. Place poles on top, hang pieces of meat on the poles, light a fire underneath, Not a hot one, a smoky one. Green branches, lots of smoke, little flame. Cover it with leaves and wait. 2 days. Tisa brought the meat, trimmings from yesterday's carcass, the parts they usually threw away. Stringy, tough. No one wanted to eat it. Artem placed the pieces on the poles. He built a smoky fire. He covered it with leaves. Smoke enveloped the meat. The smell wafted through the village. Unfamiliar. Not like ordinary cooking. Slightly sweet, tangy. People sniffed the air. 2 days later, Artem took the meat down. Dark, dry, firm to the touch. He cut off a piece and tasted it. Not bad. It was well smoked. Some salt wouldn't hurt, but it held up fine without it. He let Thar try some. The old man chewed for a long time. Then he nodded. Filling. Unusual, but filling. Artem placed the smoked meat on a rock and left it there, out in the open, under the sun. Let's call it an experiment. 3 days, 5 days, a week. The meat lay on the rock. It dried out even more. It became harder, but it didn't rot. It didn't start to stink. Flies hardly ever landed on it. The smoke had done its job. A week later, Artem took a piece and carried it to the chief's hut. Naya walked beside him. Lena followed behind her. He stopped at the entrance. He couldn't ask the chief for an audience directly. It wasn't his place. He asked Naya. She went inside. A minute later, Maruo came out. He looked at the boy, at the piece of dark meat in his hand. Artem held it out. Maruo took it, sniffed it, took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, looked at the meat, then at the boy, and asked, "How many days has this meat been sitting?" Artem answered, 7. Maruo was silent. 7 days. Meat that was 7 days old and still edible. In a world where food lasts only 2 days, this was nothing short of a miracle. Maruo took another bite. Then he turned and called out into the hut. Kano came out, broad-shouldered, with an obsidian knife at his belt. Maruo held out the meat to him. Kano took it. He looked at it suspiciously, took a bite, chewed, and Artem saw his face change. It didn't soften. No, it hardened. Because Kano wasn't stupid in the way Artem had thought. Kano was limited, but not dumb. And he instantly understood the same thing the chief had. Meat that doesn't rot is a reserve. A reserve is strength. Strength is power. Kano looked at Artem, and in his eyes there was no contempt. For the first time, in his eyes there was calculation. Artem noticed this, and a chill ran down his spine. Contempt was safe. Calculation was dangerous. An enemy who despises you leaves you alone. A calculating enemy decides how to use you. Maruo nodded and walked back. Kano stood there. He watched. Then he said quietly, "The boy does useful things. Maybe the boy needs protection. Maybe Kano could protect the boy, if the boy is grateful." And he left. Artem stood in the square, his mouth dry. It was worse than a threat. It was an offer. Kano was proposing a deal. Protection in exchange for obedience. All of Artem's inventions under Kano's name, under his control, as a tool, as property. The shaman Oro keeps his knowledge to himself. Kano wants to hold on to the knowledge through Artem, for himself. The difference is negligible. He returned to the hut. Lena was waiting. She had heard. She looked at him and waited. He sat down. He said quietly, no. He would not be Kano's tool. Lena nodded. Then she asked, "What then?" Artem looked at her, at the girl with the scorched cheek who had invented the symbol for salt. He needed to show the tribe that knowledge belonged to everyone, not to the shaman, not to the heir, to everyone. If knowledge belongs to one person, that person can be killed, and the knowledge will die. If knowledge belongs to 10 people, killing all 10 is already more difficult. If knowledge belongs to the entire tribe, everyone will have to be killed. 9 days. Artem counted them like coins. Each one was worth its weight in gold. Any one of them could be the last. The feast of Issue was approaching, and the village could feel it. The mood was changing. People spoke more quietly. The children played less. The women looked more often at the stone of Issue in the middle of the square. Dark with old blood. Slippery. Artem tried not to look at it, but he knew that soon he wouldn't be able to look away. On the 16th day of the new count, Oren came to the hut, not with herbs, alone. She sat down beside him. She was silent. Then she spoke softly. Her father knows about the boy hunter, about Rika, about the nighttime visits. Artem froze. She continued. Oro isn't angry. Oro is thinking. He's old, and he's seen many deaths. He's seen how his rituals don't help. He knows the spirits aren't answering. He's known this for a long time. But if he says it out loud, he'll cease to be a shaman. And a shaman without power in this world is as good as dead. Artem listened. Oren said that her father wanted to talk, but not in the village, not in public. He would come to the stream at sunset, alone. The boy should come alone too. Artem nodded. At sunset, he hobbled toward the stream, alone. Naya wanted to go with him. He asked her to stay. It was important. Oro was already waiting. He was sitting on a rock, without the necklace made of fingers, without paint on his face. Just an old man with wrinkled hands and tired eyes. He looked 20 years older than he had that morning when he stood before the tribe in full regalia. Artem sat down across from him. His legs were buzzing. His lungs were wheezing. They were silent. The stream murmured between them. Then Oro spoke. The boy does things that Oro doesn't understand. Soap, salt, water that heals, meat that doesn't rot, badges that mean something. These aren't spirits. Oro knows spirits. Spirits don't work that way. Spirits take. The boy gives. This is something else. Oro wants to know what. Artem thought. He could have lied, said that Tagar or Issue or the White Sun had sent him. That would have been easier. The shaman would have accepted it, would have fitted into his worldview. The boy would have become the voice of the gods, under the shaman's control, safe, predictable, dead. Because if he became the voice of the gods, every bit of his knowledge would be sacred. And what is sacred cannot be changed. It cannot be tested. It cannot be questioned. And within a generation, his discoveries would turn into rituals. Soap would be made while reciting prayers, and if the prayer was wrong, the soap wouldn't work. Water would be boiled only on the full moon. The symbols would become sacred signs that only priests could read. He saw it. He saw it as clearly as day. Religion devours knowledge. Always. Everywhere. On Earth, it took thousands of years. Here, it will take a single generation. That is why he told the truth. Not the whole truth, but the truth. He said he does not speak with spirits, that he does not know if spirits speak to anyone, that he knows only things, how things work. Ash and fat make soap not because the spirits want it to, but because that's how ash and fat work. Water heals not because a good spirit lives in it, but because fire kills the small and evil things that live in the water. Meat doesn't rot in smoke not because the spirit of fire protects it, but because smoke does to meat what fire does to water. It kills the small and evil things. He spoke and watched as Oro's face changed. Not anger, not fear. Something similar to what Artem had seen in Naya's eyes when he washed her hands. Shock. The old man's world was cracking at the seams. Everything on which he had built his life, spirits, Rituals, prayers, sacrifices, a necklace made of fingers, all of it unnecessary. It had never been necessary. The children he hadn't saved because he burned grass instead of boiling water. The people he had given to the stone because the spirits had said so, and the spirits hadn't said a thing. Silence. The stream murmured. Oro sat motionless. Then his face contorted. Then it smoothed out. Then it turned to stone. He looked at Artem and asked one thing. If the spirits don't speak, if the gods don't hear, then why the stone? Why the feast? Why all of this? Artem replied quietly, There's no reason. Oro closed his eyes. He sat there for a long time, maybe a minute, maybe 5. Artem didn't count. Then the shaman opened his eyes, and there was such pain in them that Artem looked away. Oro stood up. He didn't say another word. He walked toward the village, slowly, like a very old man. Artem sat by the stream and thought. He didn't know if he'd done the right thing. Maybe he'd alienated his only ally. Maybe he'd created an enemy more terrifying than Kano. Or maybe the old shaman, who'd believed in dead gods his whole life, had heard the truth for the first time, and now needed time. Time, which no one had. 7 days until the full moon. The village was preparing for the feast. The women were gathering firewood for a large bonfire. The men were hunting. They needed meat, lots of meat, for the living and for the dead. At the feast, the weakest were sacrificed to Issue, those who could not hunt, those who could not bear children, those who ate but gave nothing in return. This was a law older than any chieftain, older than any shaman. The law of Issue, mother of the marshes. The weak feed the strong, not with their labor, with themselves. Artem knew his name was on the list. Kenji's body, a sick boy, weak, frail, coughing up blood, the first candidate. But now he was making soap and salt, and he healed the children, and the meat didn't rot. Would that be enough? He didn't know. On the 18th day, Tharu came to him. The old man was limping less. The bandage and the willow decoction were doing their job. He sat down beside him and spoke. Tharu had overheard the conversations. The hunters were discussing the feast. They were discussing who to give to Isha. 3 names came up most often. The old woman Bona, who had gone blind in both eyes. The boy Ito with the crooked arm, his apprentice, and Kenji. Artem listened calmly. Inside, everything tightened, but he kept his composure. Tharu said the hunters were arguing. Some say they need the boy, that soap, salt, and meat are useful. Others say that Isu won't forgive them if they don't give her the weak, that drought and disease are punishment for the weak still being alive, that they must be sacrificed, and the gods will bring back the rain. Stone Age logic. Unshakable. Millennia old. Arguments are useless against it. Only one thing works against it. Results. Results you can't brush aside. Artem thought all night. By morning, he knew what to do. It was risky, maybe even foolish, but there was no other way out. He called for Lena. He asked her to bring Orin. Lena brought her. Artem asked Orin to tell him about a plant that relieves pain. The root of the toma. The one that numbs the pain if you put it on a wound. Orin explained. Then he asked, Is there a plant that makes water murky and thick? Like blood, but not blood. Orin thought for a moment. Yes, the root of the red bush by the swamp. If you crush it in water, the water turns red and thick. The tribe uses it for war paint. Artem nodded. Then he asked, Is there a plant that makes the skin go numb? Completely? Oren looked at him intently. Yes, the sap of the black vine. If you rub it on your skin, it stops feeling anything. Hunters rub it on their wounds after a fight so they won't scream. Artem sat there, sorting it all out in his head. A painkiller, a red liquid that looked like blood, a remedy for skin sensitivity. He needed a trick. Not soap, not salt, not smoked meat. He needed a miracle, a spectacle, a performance, one that would strike at the very heart of the matter, the belief that the stone of issue works. He spent 2 days preparing. Oren helped. She didn't ask why. She saw his face, and she understood from his expression. Lena helped too. She gathered roots, pounded them in a stone mortar, mixed them. 4 days before the full moon. Evening. The whole tribe gathered around the central fire. That was the custom. Before the feast, the chief announced the names, those who would be given to issue. Maruo stepped up to the fire. Old. Heavy. He didn't want to do this. Artem could see it on his face. But a chief is a chief. The law is the law. Maruo began to speak. Issue is asking. The tribe was starving. The children were sick. The hunting trails were empty. Issue is angry. So they must be handed over. He called out the first name. Bona, a blind old woman. Silence. Bona sat in the crowd. She couldn't see the chief, but she heard her name. Her expression didn't change. She had been expecting this. The second name. Ito, the boy with the crooked arm. Artem's apprentice. Ito sat next to Lena. His face turned pale. Lena grabbed his good arm. She squeezed it. The third name. Maruo hesitated. Then he said, Kenji. Naya didn't flinch. She was standing behind Artem, and her hand on his shoulder turned to stone. Heavy, motionless. Artem stood up. His legs were trembling, but he stood and stepped toward the bonfire. Silence. 200 pairs of eyes. He spoke. His voice was hoarse, quiet. But in the silence, every word reached the back rows. He said he wasn't arguing with the chieftain. He wasn't disputing his right, but he was asking for one thing, a test. If Issa truly wants blood, if the stone truly grants power, let the stone prove it. Maruo watched him. Kano stood beside his father, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. Oro stood slightly behind them. His face was unreadable. Artem continued. He would place his hand on the stone of Issa. He would ask Issa to show her power. If Isu responds, if the stone takes his blood, he'll go to the feast in silence. But if the stone remains silent, then Ishu isn't hungry. Then a sacrifice isn't needed. Noise. Voices. Someone shouted that the boy was being insolent. Someone fell silent. Maruo raised his hand. Silence. The chief looked at the boy for a long time. Then he turned to Oro, the shaman. What do the spirits say? Oro was silent. A second, 2, 10. Then he said, the spirits have no objection to a test. Let the boy place his hand on it. Artem hadn't expected this. He'd been ready to argue, to persuade, but Oro agreed at once. A conversation by the stream. Oro no longer believes, but he doesn't interfere. He's giving the boy a chance, or letting him die on his own terms. Artem approached the stone. Dark, cold, slippery with old blood, from hundreds, maybe thousands. He placed his left hand on the stone. With his right hand, he discreetly clutched a small bundle. Inside was a piece of hide soaked in the sap of the black vine. 10 minutes ago, he'd rubbed that sap all over his left palm. The skin had gone completely numb. He couldn't feel the stone. He couldn't feel the cold. Nothing. He pulled an obsidian knife from his belt. Small. Sharp. He raised it so everyone could see, and ran the blade across his palm. A cry went up from the crowd. Naya lunged forward. Tisa grabbed her by the arm. Artem didn't flinch. He felt no pain. His skin was numb. The knife was blunt. He'd swapped it out beforehand. A dull blade against numb skin. The cut was shallow. Just a scratch. But the red liquid from the root, which he'd crushed beforehand, was already flowing down his fingers from beneath the bundle in his sleeve. A lot of it. Thick. Red. Like blood. Brighter than blood. It flowed down his arm. Down the stone. And the stone. The stone didn't absorb it, because it wasn't blood. The liquid from the root ran down the slippery surface and dripped onto the ground. The stone remained dark, wet, but it didn't absorb it. Artem raised his hand. The red liquid ran down his fingers. He turned toward the tribe. He didn't take the stone. Isu isn't hungry. Silence. Absolute silence. 200 people stared at the stone, at the red liquid on the ground, at the boy with the wet hand, and at the stone that hadn't taken the blood. They didn't know it was a trick. They didn't know the blood wasn't real. They didn't know the skin couldn't feel. They saw only one thing. The boy had cut his hand. Blood was flowing. The stone did not take it. That meant Isu had turned away. That meant a sacrifice was not needed. Maruo stood there, his face ashen. He looked at Oro. The shaman was silent. He neither confirmed nor denied it. He simply remained silent. Kano gripped the knife so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He sensed that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Maruo spoke slowly. The stone wasn't taken. Isu is silent. There will be a feast, but there will be no sacrifice. This time. A scream, a sigh. One of the women began to cry. Ito's mother. Artem stood by the stone, trembling, his legs, his hands, his whole body. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind emptiness and weakness. He turned and walked toward the hut. One step, another step. Don't fall. Don't fall in front of them. He made it. He collapsed onto the mat. Naya was right there. She grabbed his hand, his left one, wet with red liquid. She looked at the cut. A scratch, not a wound, superficial. She looked at the red liquid. She sniffed it. Then she looked at him, and he saw that she understood. Not everything, but the main thing. It wasn't blood. The sun had tricked the stone. The sun had tricked Issa. The sun had tricked 200 people, and he had saved 3. She said nothing. She lay down beside him, covered him with a pelt, and didn't let go of his hand until morning. In the morning, Artem woke up and felt alive. A strange feeling. He'd grown unaccustomed to it. The full moon had passed. The feast had taken place without sacrifices. The tribe ate meat, danced, sang, and no one lay on the stone. For the first time in the history of the Red Fangs, the Feast of Isu had passed without blood. No one knew what it meant, but everyone sensed it. Something had changed. Something big and quiet had shifted at the foundation of the world. That afternoon, Oro came to him, alone, without paint, without a necklace. He sat down across from him, and he said one thing. The boy is cunning. Artem remained silent. Oro continued. The stone won't accept it because it's not blood. It's the sap of the red root. Oro knows this root. He uses it himself for painting. Artem remained silent. Oro spoke. He could have told the tribe. He could have exposed the boy. The boy had deceived Isa. That's death. Worse than death. They'd tear him to pieces. Artem looked into the shaman's eyes and waited. Oro fell silent. Then his face twitched. His lips pressed together, then parted. And he said quietly, "My grandson, little Sori, 3 years old. A wound on his leg from a falling rock. It got infected. His leg swelled up. Black streaks spread upward across the skin. Oro had burned all the herbs he knew. He had recited all the prayers. Nothing helped. The boy who had recovered from his fever might know what to do." Artem looked at the old man, at the shaman to whom he had said by the stream that the gods were dead, at the man who could destroy him with a single word, at the grandfather who had come to plead for his grandson. He nodded. "Show me the boy." They walked to Oro's hut together, the shaman and the boy, the old man and the teenager, two people who knew far too much about each other and who now had nowhere to hide from one another. Little Sori lay on a mat. His leg had swollen to twice its size, red, with black streaks running from his foot to his knee. Pus. The stench. Artem looked at it and his heart sank. Sepsis, or something close to it. Blood poisoning. Back on Earth, that would mean intravenous antibiotics and maybe surgery. Here, he had no antibiotics, no syringes, nothing. There was willow bark. There was boiled water. He hadn't slept for 3 days. He couldn't. Every morning, he went to Oro's hut and changed the bandage on Sori's leg. Every time, he washed the wound with soap and boiled water. Every time, he poured honey on it. Every time, he wrapped it in fresh cloth. And every time, he looked at the black streaks on the boy's skin. On the first day, they hadn't changed. On the second, they had faded slightly, or so it seemed to him. He couldn't be sure. He wasn't a doctor. He was a graduate student in chemistry who remembered fragments of the history of medicine and a microbiology lecture from his sophomore year. He was working blindly. No tests, no microscope, no certainty. With nothing but honey and the desperate knowledge that honey had worked 3,000 years ago in Egypt, it had to work here too. On the third day, he arrived at dawn. Oro was sitting next to his grandson. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red. His hands rested on his knees. Artem unwrapped the bandage. He looked at the leg and exhaled. The black streaks had stopped spreading. They hadn't gone away, but they had stopped. The edge of the redness hadn't spread any higher than it had 2 days ago. The swelling had subsided slightly. The pus had lightened in color, not green, yellowish. The boy's body had begun to fight back. Honey was keeping the infection at bay. Boiled water was washing away the dirt. Willow decoction was bringing down the fever. And the tiny body of a 3-year-old child was doing the rest. Artem rinsed the wound. He poured fresh honey over it. He bandaged it up. He turned to Oro. The streaks had stopped spreading. The body is fighting. 3 more days like this, maybe 4. If the stripes start to fade, the boy will survive. Oro looked at his grandson, then at Artem, then back at his grandson, and he nodded. Once. Slowly. On the 4th day, the stripes began to fade. On the 5th, they receded below the knee. On the 6th, the swelling had gone down by half. Sori opened his eyes and asked for food. His voice was thin and weak, but he was alive. Oro fed him porridge made from soaked tubers and gave him boiled water to drink. Artem stood at the entrance and watched. The old shaman sat on the floor of the hut and fed the 3-year-old boy from a spoon. And his hands, which had once held ritual knives and necklaces made of human fingers, were trembling with tenderness. Artem turned away and walked toward his hut. Lena was waiting at the entrance. She looked at his face and understood everything. The boy would live. Artem nodded. He sat down and he began to cry. For the first time since the transfer. Quietly, without a sound, tears simply streamed down his cheeks and he couldn't stop them. These weren't tears of joy, nor of relief. They were the tears of a man who had been walking on the edge of a pit for 20 days and realized for the first time that he hadn't fallen. Lena sat down beside him, silently. She didn't touch him. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. 10 minutes later, he wiped his face and said, "All right, let's get to work." The next day, Oro came to Artem's hut with a necklace, with paint, dressed in full shaman's regalia. Artem tensed up, but Oro didn't bring up the spirits. He sat down and said briefly, "Oro will remain silent." About the stone, about the red root, about how the boy had deceived the tribe. Oro would remain silent because the boy had saved Sori. A debt is a debt. But that's not all. Oro wants to learn. Artem blinked. A shaman wants to learn? From a 13-year-old boy. Oro continued. He's old. He knows his rituals don't work. He'd known this for a long time. But he didn't know what worked instead. Now he knows. Soap, boiling, honey, bandages. It works. He saw it with his own eyes on his own grandson. He wants to know more. Artem looked at the old man, and for the first time since he'd been in this world, he felt something like hope. Not hope for survival. He already knew he would survive. Hope that this might actually work, that it's possible to change not just one person at a time, but 2, 5, 10, if the shaman is on his side. If the shaman teaches alongside him, then that knowledge ceases to be the heresy of a sorcerer's apprentice. It becomes a new form of shamanism, not a lie, a new truth, one that the old shaman confirms with his authority. Artem held out his hand. Oro looked at it. In this world, people didn't shake hands. But Oro understood the gesture. He placed his palm on the boy's palm, a dry, rough old hand on a thin child's hand. A pact. Without words, no rituals. From that day on, Oro came every evening. Artem taught him. Boiling, cleaning wounds, dosage of willow decoction, soap, bandages. Oro listened, memorized, and added his own insights. He knew 43 plants. Artem knew 12 of them from Orin. The remaining 31 were new. Among them was a local equivalent of garlic, an antiseptic, an antibacterial agent, a natural antibiotic, weak but effective. There was a root that dilated blood vessels. Artem thought about it and realized it might help with headaches and high blood pressure. There was an herb that stopped bleeding, an astringent, tannins. If applied to a wound, the blood would clot faster. The Stone Age sat atop a mountain of medicines and didn't know it. Because the shaman used them as ritual tools, not as medicine. Because the dosage was determined by the will of the spirits, not by the patient's body weight. Because no one ever wrote down what worked and what didn't. Artem began to write things down. Not on paper. There was no paper. On clay. He kneaded the clay into a flat disc. He scratched symbols into it. He fired it in the kiln. The result was a tablet, just like in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. On the first tablet, he recorded 14 symbols and their meanings. On the second, a recipe for soap. On the third, a recipe for willow decoction with dosage instructions. Lena watched and memorized. She could already read all the symbols with ease. She had already added 3 of her own. The 18th for honey, the 19th for a wound, the 20th for a child. The system was growing. Small, clumsy, illogical. But it worked. Artem understood that this wasn't real writing. These were pictograms, pictures. To have real writing, you need phonetic symbols, syllables, sounds. But for a start, the pictograms worked. Lena could take the tablet with the soap recipe and repeat the process without his prompting. Tisa could take the tablet with the boiling instructions and explain it to a new woman. This was knowledge that didn't die with its bearer, knowledge on clay, immortal. On the 25th day after waking up in this world, Artem stood by the kiln and fired the sixth tablet, a recipe for porridge made from soaked tubers. Next to him, Lena was firing the seventh, a recipe for a honey poultice. Beside her, Oren watched silently and occasionally corrected the plant symbol that Lena had drawn incorrectly. Beside her, Tisa was kneading clay for the next batch. Beside her, Maro was chopping wood for the kiln. Beside her, Tharu sat by the salt pot, stoking the coals. Beside him, Ito was drawing symbols on the ground with his left, healthy hand, his face focused and happy. 7 people, gathered around a single furnace, doing what no one else in this world had ever done, recording knowledge. Artem watched them and thought. A month ago, he had been dying in the body of a stranger's boy. Now he had a team. Small, weak, but a team. And it had knowledge etched into clay that would outlive any of them. That evening, Cassie came to the hut. Artem had seen her before, from a distance. It was impossible not to notice her. She was different. Not dark-skinned like the rest. Fair skin, light hair, dirty and tangled, but light. Delicate features. She wasn't from this tribe. She was a slave, an outsider, a captive. They'd brought her 2 years ago from somewhere in the east, sold for 3 spears and a leopard pelt. She'd been working ever since. Carrying water, chopping wood. She slept against the wall of a stranger's hut. She ate leftovers. The tribe tolerated her because she worked for 2, and because they planned to eat her at the next feast, which had just passed without any sacrifices. Cassie arrived in the evening. She stood at the entrance, silently. Artem looked at her. She wasn't looking at him, at the ground in front of the hut, at the symbols Lena had drawn that morning and hadn't erased, at the 14 squiggles and 6 new ones. Cassie stood there, moving her lips, silently, as if she were saying something. Artem frowned. He stood up and stepped closer. She didn't run away, but she tensed up, her whole body, like a beast ready to pounce. He looked at the symbols, then at her, then back at the symbols. She was moving her lips. Artem froze. She wasn't saying his symbols. She was saying something else. She was looking at the stick, the circle, and the triangle. Cassie didn't leave. She came by every evening after work. She would sit down by the hut. She drew letters, in silence. Artem didn't pressure her. He showed her his badges, she showed him her letters. Gradually, they began to talk. Cassie spoke the language of the Red Fangs with a strong accent. She swallowed the endings. She mixed up her words. But she spoke. She told him that she had been brought here when she was 8. She remembered the city, stone walls, red clay roofs, a fountain in the square, her mother baking flatbread on a large stone, the letters her mother taught her in the evenings by the light of an oil lamp. Then people came, with spears, with ropes. They took her and 4 other children. They led them through the jungle for many days, sold them at the market by the river. She was passed from hand to hand 3 times. Her last owners traded her to the Red Fangs. That was 11 years ago. Artem listened. The city, stone walls, a fountain, writing. This isn't the Stone Age. It's at least the Bronze Age, maybe the early Iron Age. Beyond the mountains to the east, there's a civilization, an advanced one, with writing and architecture. And between it and the jungle, slave traders operate. The eastern rivers, he remembered. He asked Cassie how many letters she remembered. She thought for a moment. She held up her fingers. 11. Out of how many? She didn't know. Her mother hadn't had time to teach her all of them. 11 letters and a few words. Mom, bread, water, house, son. Artem nodded. 11 letters isn't many, but it's a phonetic writing system, a real one, not just pictures, sounds. If he could reconstruct the system or create his own based on what Cassie remembered, it would be a leap, a huge one, from pictograms to the alphabet. He began working with her every evening for an hour. She tried to remember, slowly, painfully. Some letters came to mind right away. Others trembled on the edge of her memory and slipped away. He didn't rush her. He waited. He helped. He drew similar shapes next to them and asked, "This one? Or this one?" Cassie frowned. She traced the lines with her finger. Sometimes she nodded. Sometimes she shook her head. By the end of their first week working together, they had 15 letters. She had rediscovered 4 of them. Artem didn't know which language they belonged to. Not the Latin alphabet, not Cyrillic, not Arabic script. Something local. Something from this world. He drew them on clay tablets and fired them. Next to each letter, Cassie pronounced the sound. Artem recorded the sound using his own symbols. The result was a dictionary. An ugly one, a bilingual one, but a dictionary nonetheless. 2 more weeks passed while he worked with Cassie. A month and 10 days since he'd woken up. The world around him was changing, slowly, imperceptibly to those who didn't know where to look. But it was changing. Children had stopped dying from red rot. Not all of them, but those whose mothers boiled water and washed their hands. 7 out of 10. That figure was unbelievable. 2 months ago, 1 in 4 survived. Now, 7 out of 10. The mothers didn't know the word statistics, but they knew names, the names of the children who were alive. Soap had become commonplace. Naya made it every 3 days. Tisa had learned to do it too, and 2 other women. 4 hearths were used to make soap. Gray bars lay outside every hut. People had gotten used to it, washing their hands before eating, washing their hands after work, washing the children. A simple action, basic, but it changed everything. The sores on their skin were healing. The abscesses were disappearing. The smell in the village had changed. It hadn't gone away. 200 people in the tropics without a sewage system? That's still a smell. But it had become more bearable. Salt was a problem. Evaporating water from the stream yielded just a few grams. That wasn't enough. Artem thought of the salt lake to the south. A 3-day journey. He still couldn't walk that far. But now he had people with him. On the 40th day, he asked Tisa and Maro to go south with 2 pots to collect water from the dead lake, to bring it back. Not to drink it, not to touch it with their hands, just to bring it back. They left at dawn. Artem waited. 6 days later, they returned, tired, thin, but with 2 pots of dark, thick water. Artem sniffed it, licked a drop from his finger. Salty. Very salty. Concentrated brine. Minerals, sodium, potassium, maybe magnesium, maybe something else. He put the pots on the fire. He boiled it down for 2 days. A layer remained at the bottom, thick, white with gray. He scraped it off, crumbled it, and tasted it. Salt. Real salt. Not perfectly pure, but salt. A lot of it. 2 full handfuls. More than he'd gotten from the stream in 3 weeks, in a single trip. He showed it to the tribe. He placed a handful of salt on a stone in the center of the square. Next to it, he set a bowl of tuber porridge. He sprinkled salt on it. He stirred it. He let the first person who approached try it. It was a hunter. Strong, broad-shouldered, one of Kano's people. He tasted the porridge with salt. He froze. He tasted it again. and his eyes became like a child's, wide and full of wonder. He tasted the flavor, the true flavor, not bitterness, not blandness, flavor. By evening, everyone had tasted the salt. Artem handed out a pinch to each hut, generously, without being stingy. That's important. Knowledge that is hoarded loses its power. Maruo tasted the salt and was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. The boy will go to the dead lake, with the hunters, with pots, many pots, lots of salt. Artem replied, The boy won't make it. His legs are weak, his lungs are bad. But the boy will tell the others how to do it. Tisa already knows the way. Maro knows how to distill. Maruo nodded, and for the first time, he didn't call him boy. He called him Kenji, by name. For the chief, this was recognition, not as an equal, not as a warrior, but as a human being. A human being with a name. The 45th day. Artem decided it was time to take the next big step. Distillation. Alcohol. Not for drinking, for medicine. Alcohol as an antiseptic. For treating wounds. For sterilizing instruments. For extracting medicinal substances from plants. Alcohol is the key to the next level of medicine. Without it, he'll be stuck at honey and bandages. For distillation, he needed a still, the simplest kind, a pot with a lid, a hole in the lid, a reed tube in the hole. The tube runs downward and passes through a vessel of cold water. Steam rises from the pot. It travels up the tube. It cools. It condenses. It drips into a collection vessel. Classic distillation. He remembered the diagram from his freshman year. He'd drawn it 100 times on exams. The problem was the materials. He had a pot. He could make a lid out of clay. He could make a tube out of a hollow reed. But what about the seal? The vapor would escape through the cracks. He needed a sealant. Clay cracks in the heat. He needed something elastic, heat-resistant. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he remembered. Resin. Tree resin. If mixed with ash and fine sand, it would make a primitive sealant. Not perfect, but good enough for a first attempt. He asked Lena to collect resin from the trees. Lena collected it. Sticky, dark, fragrant. He mixed it with ash. The result was something viscous and dense. He smeared it on the joint between the lid and the pot, on the joint between the tube and the lid. He let it dry in the sun. It hardened. It holds. For distillation, he needs raw materials, something sugary, fruit. He asked Naya what kinds of fruit grew nearby. Naya listed them. Yellow, sweet fruits from a large tree by the river, red berries on the bushes by the swamp, small, sour little balls on the vines. Artem asked her to gather some of the yellow ones. Sweet means sugar. Sugar means fermentation. Fermentation means alcohol. Naya brought a basket of fruit. Soft, overripe, perfect. Artem mashed them in a pot. He poured water over them, covered them with leaves, set it in the shade. Now to wait. The yeast in the air would do the work. 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. While it fermented, he set about other tasks. The smokehouse was in operation every day. The meat was smoked and stacked in a pit lined with leaves. The supply grew. The hunters noticed. Before, a failed hunt meant hunger. Now, a failed hunt meant a dinner of smoked meat and porridge with salt. The difference between despair and calm. Artem saw the faces change. People who had lived on the brink of starvation their whole lives knew for the first time that there would be food tomorrow. That knowledge changed them. They were calmer, quieter, gentler. Hunger turns people into beasts. Satiety makes them human. A simple formula. Simple and terrifying. On the 50th day, the mash began to ferment. The pot gurgled. Foam rose to the surface. The smell was sour and sweet at the same time. Artem tasted it. 3 or 4 degrees. Weak. But there was alcohol. Now for distillation. He poured the mash into the still, sealed the joints, lit a fire. Slow. Steady. Not too hot. Alcohol has a lower boiling point than water. If heated slowly, the alcohol will evaporate first. It'll travel up the tube, cool down, and drip into the receiver. He waited. Lena sat nearby and watched. Naya stoked the coals. The first drop fell an hour later. Clear. He caught it on his finger. He sniffed it. A sharp smell. Like alcohol. Faint, but there. He smiled. The drops came slowly, 1 at a time, then 2. By evening, a little liquid had collected in the small bowl. It was slightly cloudy. It smelled of alcohol and fruit. The first distillation. Unrefined, 15 to 20 degrees. He needed more for an antiseptic. He needed a second distillation, and a third. Each one increased the concentration. But he'd made a start. He dipped his finger in, rubbed it between his fingers. His skin tightened slightly. Alcohol evaporates faster than water and draws out moisture. It works. He sealed the bowl with a sheet of paper and put it away. He'd do the second distillation tomorrow. On the 52nd day, Artem distilled the liquid a second time. Stronger, sharper, 30 degrees, maybe 40. Without an alcohol meter, he couldn't say for sure. But the smell stung his nose. And if he dripped a drop onto a flame, it flared blue. It burns. So the strength was sufficient. He showed it to Oro. The old shaman sniffed it. He recoiled. Then he looked at it with interest. Artem explained, "This is water that kills tiny worms even better than boiling water. If you wash a wound with this water, it won't get infected. If you soak a knife in it, the knife will become clean. Truly clean. Not just of dirt, of those tiny, invisible creatures that live everywhere." Oro listened. His face was inscrutable. Then he asked, "What if you drink it?" Artem replied, "You'll feel sick. Your head will spin, your body will stop obeying you." 2 months, 60 days in his new body. His lungs still wheezed in the mornings. The cough came in waves. But blood appeared on the rag less often. Willow bark and mint inhalations were doing their job. Kenji's body hadn't recovered, but it had stopped dying. Artem had gained some weight, a little. His ribs still stuck out, but not as clearly. Porridge made from tubers with salt, smoked meat, boiled roots. He ate 3 times a day, for the first time in the life of this body. Before, Kenji had eaten once a day, if he was lucky. He could stand, walk, 500 steps without stopping, then a rest, then another 500. No running, no jumping, no lifting anything heavier than a pot. But for what he was doing, a warrior's legs weren't necessary. What he needed was his head and his hands, and the people around him who did what he couldn't. The community was growing, not in numbers, but in bonds. Naya made soap and taught others. Tisa went to the lake for salt once every 10 days with 3 helpers. Maro fired the pots. Better than a month ago. Smoother, stronger. She'd learned to add sand to the clay and fire them longer. Tharu watched over the smokehouse and was in charge of supplies. His leg hardly hurt at all. The willow decoction and bandages had reduced the inflammation. He walked with a cane, but he walked. And he was happy, because he was needed. Lena was learning. She absorbed knowledge like dry earth absorbs water. All 23 symbols and 15 letters of Kasi. Recipes, dosages, sequences. She remembered everything. And she didn't just remember, she understood the principle. When Artem explained that soap is made because lye breaks down fat, she asked, What if we use something other than ash? Something else that also burns the skin? Would that make soap too? Artem froze. She had grasped the principle of alkalinity without a single technical term, without chemistry, intuitively. He replied, yes. If you find another substance that burns like lye and mix it with fat, you might get soap, or something like it. Lena nodded and left. She returned the next day with the juice of some plant, white, caustic. It burned her fingers. She mixed it with fat. She heated it, and she got something. Not soap, not exactly, but something slippery and foamy. Artem looked at it and thought, she's 13. She doesn't know the word chemistry, but she's already experimenting on her own, based on a principle. If she lives to be 20, she'll change this world no less than he has. Oren came every day. She and Artem worked together. They categorized the plants. They wrote them down on labels. Name, symbol, where it grows, what it cures. Dosage, what happens if you give too much. By the 60th day, they had 27 plant labels, a primitive reference guide. Oren knew it by heart. But the labels were more important, because if Oren got sick or died, the labels would remain. Cassie came in the evenings. She told stories about the city, about the stone houses, about the market where they sold fabrics and painted clay jugs, about the temple on the hill with columns, about the priests in white robes. Artem listened and drew a map, a rough one, on the ground. Here is the jungle. Here are the mountains. There is the city, roughly. Cassie remembered the direction, east, across the mountains, many days' journey, maybe 20, maybe 30. She was a child when they led her there. She hadn't counted. But she remembered the mountains, snow on the peaks, the cold, then the descent, then the plain, then the city. The city was called Akor, or something like that. Cassie wasn't sure, a child's memory. 11 years had passed, but Akor, that was the name. Artem wrote it down on a tablet, the first geographical name, the first point on the map beyond the jungle. On the 65th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. A messenger arrived from the north, not from the Bone Masks, from a small tribe between them and the Red Fangs. The tribe was called the Gray Herons, small, peaceful. They lived by the marshes and fished. They didn't wage war, they didn't eat people, and that's why they were prey to everyone. The messenger was a boy of about 15, skinny, dirty, frightened. He fell to his knees in front of the chief's hut and spoke quickly. Fever. There's a fever in their village. People are burning up, dying. 10 in the last moon. Half the tribe is bedridden. They'd heard about the boy at Red Fangs who heals, who draws out the filth, who makes medicine for the sickness. They're begging, send the boy, or his knowledge, anything. Maduo listened to the messenger. Then he called for Artem and Oro. The three of them sat in the chief's hut. It was the first time Artem had been admitted to a council of this level. Maduo asked, could the boy help the Gray Herons? Artem thought, a fever, malaria, or something viral, or a bacterial infection. You can't tell without tests. But the basic measures work in any case. Boiled water, willow decoction for fever, isolating the sick from the healthy, cleanliness, soap. He couldn't go himself. It was a 2-day trek through the jungle, and his lungs wouldn't hold out. But he could send someone, with instructions, with a supply of soap, with willow bark, with signs explaining what to do. He looked at Oro. The shaman was silent. Artem spoke. He would send Lena and Naya. Lena knows all the instructions. Naya knows how to make soap and brew the decoction. The mother of one of the rescued children would go with them. 3 women, with soap and bark and knowledge. Maruo frowned. Women, to a foreign tribe, without hunters. Artem replied, hunters aren't needed. The Grey Herons aren't enemies. They're asking for help. If the Red Fangs help, the Grey Herons will become friends. Not slaves, not prey, friends. Who will trade fish, who will warn of raids by the bone masks, who will become our first allies. Maruo looked at the boy. Artem could see a thought forming in the old chief's mind. It was hard. It came with a grind. The chief was used to thinking in terms of spears. An alliance forged through aid isn't a spear. It's something else, unfamiliar. But meat that didn't rot had also been unfamiliar. And salt. And soap. The boy hadn't been wrong so far. Maruo nodded. Let them go. Lena and Naya left at dawn. Tisa went with them. 3 women, a basket of soap, a sack of willow bark, a pot of salt, 5 clay tablets with instructions, and a knife, just in case. Artem stood at the village gate and watched them disappear into the jungle. Naya turned around. She looked at him. He nodded. She nodded, and disappeared into the greenery. He stood there, thinking. This was the first time his knowledge was going out into the world without him, on its own, in the hands of others. If it worked, if Lena and Naya could manage without him, that meant the knowledge had become more than just one person. That meant he could be killed and the knowledge would survive. It was the most important thing he'd done in 2 months. More important than soap. More important than salt. More important than alcohol. He had let go of the knowledge, and it had gone. He waited for 3 days. He worked. He distilled alcohol. He burned the tablets. He taught Ito and 2 other children the symbols. But he waited. On the evening of the 4th day, a group approached the village. Not 3 people, 12. Lena walked in front. Behind her was Naya. Behind her was Tisa. And behind them were 9 people from the Grey Herons. 4 women, 3 children, 2 men. They carried bundles on their backs. Fish. Dried fish. A lot. Lena approached Artem. She was dirty, tired, with scraped knees and scratched hands. She stood before him and spoke. 6 were sick. 2 were seriously ill. She had them boil water. She gave them the broth. She washed the hands of the sick and those who cared for them. 2 months and 2 weeks. 75 days. The village was changing, not quickly, but unstoppably. 9 newcomers from the Grey Herons had built huts on the eastern outskirts. They fished in the river and brought their catch to the communal area. Fish, plus smoked meat, plus tuber porridge, plus salt. The tribe's diet had become more varied in 2 months than in the previous 100 years. The children were gaining weight. Slowly, but they were gaining it. Their swollen bellies were shrinking. Their eyes cleared. The 4 children whose mothers had been feeding them porridge with salt and boiled fish began running around the village. Before, they had sat by their huts, staring into space. Now they were running, shouting, fighting over sticks. Artem watched them and smiled. Children who fight over sticks are healthy children. Artem was working on 2 things at once. First, pottery. The pots that Morrow fired were rough, thick-walled, heavy. They were suitable for cooking and storage. But Artem needed thin pottery, for a distillation flask, for tableware, for tubes, for future experiments. He remembered that the key to good ceramics was the firing temperature and the composition of the clay. The higher the temperature, the harder the piece. The more uniform the clay, the smoother the walls. He asked Morrow to find different kinds of clay. Red, yellow, gray, white. Morrow brought 4 kinds. Artem molded a small, identical pot from each and fired them in the kiln. He compared them. The gray one turned out to be the best. Dense, resonant, minimal cracks. He showed it tomorrow. From that day on, only gray. And fire it longer. Day 2. The third day of non-stop firing. Morrow grumbled. So much firewood. But she did it. The result was worth it. The gray clay pots were different. Thinner, lighter, stronger. Artem made a new distillation cube out of them. Better than the first one. Fewer cracks, less steam loss. The alcohol came out stronger, purer. The second area, fertilizers. The vegetable garden planted with 5 tubers had sprouted. Green shoots poked out of the ground like little victory flags. But 5 tubers was ridiculous. He needed a field, a real one, with fertilizer. He knew 3 things about fertilizers in the Stone Age: ash, bone meal, compost. Ash contains potassium and phosphorus. Bone meal contains phosphorus and calcium. Compost contains nitrogen and everything else. Together, they provide almost the full range of nutrients. He asked Thara to organize the collection. All the ash from the hearths into one pit. All the bones from the meat into another pit. All the waste, hides, rotten fruit, fish guts into a third pit. Cover with soil, water it, wait. Tharu listened and grimaced. A pit full of rot. But he did it. In a month, the compost would be ready. In 2 months, they could fertilize the field. Artem thought months ahead, because if you don't think ahead, the future won't come. On the 80th day, Tara arrived. Artem knew about her. The whole tribe knew. Tara was the only female hunter. 22 years old, broad shoulders, hands covered in scars, short hair. She killed animals just as well as the men, and better than some of them. But the tribe didn't know what to do with her. A woman who hunts is an anomaly. Not a wife, not a mother, not a slave. Something incomprehensible. The men kept their distance. The women did too. Tara lived alone in a hut on the edge of the village. She ate alone. She slept alone. 22 years of solitude among 200 people. She came to Artem in the morning, silently. She stood in the doorway, blocking the light. He looked up at her. She was twice as broad as he was. Muscles, real muscles, not for show, a tool for survival. She said briefly, she needs hides, special ones, thick ones, for something. She'd heard that the boy knew things about hides that others didn't. Artem frowned. He hadn't said anything about hides. Then he understood. Soap. Soap made from fat and lye. Hides are fat. She tied them up. He asked, why does she need the hides? Tara answered, she wants to make a bag, a big one, for water, to carry to the salt lake. Clay pots are heavy. They break. Hides don't break. Artem looked at her. She was solving a logistical problem, on her own, without his prompting. She saw the problem. Pots aren't reliable for long journeys. And she proposed a solution, a water skin, a leather water skin for carrying liquid. He nodded. The hides need to be treated. First, clean off the meat and fat, then soak them in lye, then dry them on a frame, then saturate them with fat so they don't let water through. He knew the process. Rough, leather tanning. Proper tanning requires tannins from oak bark or a substitute. But for a water-carrying wineskin, a primitive treatment would suffice. He explained it to Tara, step by step. She listened in silence, nodding. She didn't ask for clarification. She memorized it on the first try. Then she left. She returned 3 days later with the wineskin. Rough, crooked. But it didn't leak. Artem held it in his hands and felt its weight. Tara had made it in 3 days. Alone. Based on a verbal description. Without diagrams. Without labels. From memory. He looked at her. She stood there waiting. Not for praise, not for an evaluation, like a craftsman who had brought his work to the client. He said, "It's a good wineskin. I need 5 more like this for the expedition to the lake. And I need hides of a certain thickness for something else, for bellows." Tara raised an eyebrow. Bellows? Artem explained. He wanted to build a furnace, a real one, a big one. It needed air, a lot of air. If you make a bag out of a hide with a tube and squeeze it, the air will flow into the furnace through the tube. The fire will get hotter, much hotter, hot enough to melt things. Tara asked, "What will you melt?" Artem replied, "I don't know yet, but when I find out, I'll need bellows." Tara nodded, and she left. He watched her go. This woman thought with her hands. Not with words, not with symbols, with her hands. Show her something once, and she'll repeat it. Explain the principle, and she'll improve on it. She wasn't a scientist like Lena. She wasn't a herbalist like Oren. She was an engineer, a craftsman, a person who turns an idea into a thing. He desperately needed someone like that. On the 85th day, what he'd been waiting for ever since he first planted the tuber cuttings in the ground finally happened. Sprouts had grown. They unfurled their leaves, and in the soil beneath them, tubers had swollen. New ones. 5 cuttings had yielded 12 tubers, more than he'd planted. He dug one up, a large one, about the size of 2 fists. He soaked it for 2 days, boiled it, tasted it. Flaky, filling. With salt, it was just like a potato. Almost. He stood there looking at that tuber, and he was shaking. Not from weakness, from realization. The earth gives more than it takes. He planted 5. He got 12. If you plant 12, you'll get 30. If 30, then 70. Exponential growth. After 3 harvests, the tribe will have enough food so they won't have to hunt every day. After 5 harvests, there will be a surplus. After 7, they'll be able to feed 300 people with the plants. Hunting will become a supplement, not the mainstay. This means the hunters will have free time, kind they can spend on construction, on training, and on defense. This marks the end of the nomadic way of life and the beginning of a settled way of life. He called his entire team, Nayu, Tisu, Maro, Tharu, Lena, Ito, Orin, and Taru, 8 people in all. He showed them the 12 tubers. He explained, the earth had yielded them, 12 from 5. If they planted all 12, in 3 moons, there would be 30. They needed a field, a large one, by the river, to clear it, to till it, to fertilize it with ash and bone meal, to plant all 12, and to wait. Maro asked, "What if they don't grow?" Artem replied, "They'll grow." He'd seen it. The earth takes and gives. It's not magic, it's the earth. Tharu grunted. He looked at the tuber in Artem's hand, then at the ground, then at the tuber again. And for the first time ever, he smiled. The old hunter to whom no one could explain why one would put food in the dirt. He saw the result. 5 had become 12, and he believed. On the 90th day, the field was ready. Small, 10 paces by 10 paces, cleared, loosened, fertilized with ash. 12 tubers lay in little holes, covered with soil, watered. Artem stood at the edge of the field, looking at the bare earth and seeing the future. Fields, many fields, grain, vegetables, fruit, warehouses, supplies, a village that isn't afraid of winter, people who aren't afraid of tomorrow. Lena stood nearby, sketching on a board, a map of the field, what was planted where, when to water, when to fertilize. The first agronomic record in the history of the world of Kaoro. Artem looked at her and said, Someday, someone will find this tablet, and they won't believe that a 13-year-old girl drew it. Lena shrugged. She didn't care. She was drawing. 3 months, 90 days. Artem stood at the edge of the village and looked at what he saw every morning. Huts, smoke, people. But today, he looked at it differently. He didn't see a village. He saw a problem. The village was growing. 212 people. Soon, there would be more. Another family from the Grey Herons had asked to live nearby. 2 hunters from a small southern clan had come on their own. Rumors were spreading through the jungle like smoke. A tribe where people don't go hungry, where children don't die of red rot, where there's white powder that makes food taste good. People flocked to this rumor like moths to a flame. The problem lay elsewhere. A wall of stakes won't protect 212 people. Huts made of leaves and clay fall apart every rainy season. There's no water system, no sewage system, not even proper paths between the huts. Everything had sprung up haphazardly, like mold on bread. And if the bone masks come, and they will come sooner or later, the rumors will reach them too. They'll wipe out the village in an hour. Artem went to see Maruo, alone, in the morning. He sat down in front of the chief and said, "The village must change. We need a wall, a real one. A palisade of thick logs dug deep into the ground, sharpened at the top, with a gate, with platforms for lookouts. We need pits in front of the wall, with stakes at the bottom, covered with leaves. Whoever steps on them will fall. We need a moat, at least a shallow one, filled with water, not for beauty's sake, to slow the enemy down." Maruo listened. Then he asked, "Had the boy seen anything like this?" Artem replied, "No, but he knows how it works. Like meat in smoke, like soap made from ashes. Not because he's seen it, because he understands." Maruo was silent. Then he said, "This is work for men, for hunters. Hunters listen to Kano." Artem understood. A trap, or an opportunity. Maruo said, "If you want the wall, go to Kano. Convince him." Artem walked toward Kano's hut, his stomach twisting into a knot. Kano sat in front of the hut, sharpening an obsidian knife. Slowly, rhythmically. He looked up at Artem, expressionless. Artem sat down across from him and began to speak, not about the wall, about meat, about smoked meat that doesn't rot, about salt that makes food taste good, about the field that yields tubers. Kano listened, silently. The knife glided across the stone. Artem said, "All of this can be lost. One raid by the bone masks and the field is trampled. The smokehouse is burned down. The salt pots are smashed. People are killed or eaten. If Kano wants all of this to remain, he needs a wall. Building a wall is the hunter's job. Kano commands the hunters. If Kano builds a wall, Kano will protect everything that's been made. And the tribe will know who protected them. Not the boy who makes soap, but the warrior who built the fortress." Kano stopped sharpening the knife. He looked at Artem. His eyes were narrow, calculating. He understood. The boy was offering him glory. Simple and clear. The boy makes things. Kano protects things. The boy is the head. Kano is the fist. Each in his place. Kano wasn't stupid. He was limited. But within those limits, he thought quickly and clearly. Protection was his domain. The spear and the wall were his language. The boy spoke his language. Kano nodded. "Let the boy show where to put up the wall. Kano will put it up." Artem nearly choked with relief. He didn't show it. He nodded in response, calmly, as an equal, and he walked out. Outside the hut's door, he bent over double and coughed so hard that his vision went dark. His lungs. Always his lungs. Every time he strained himself, every time the adrenaline wore off, his body reminded him, "You're sick. You're weak. You're a guest in a stranger's house, and the house is falling apart." He straightened up, wiped the blood from his lips, went to sketch out a plan for the wall on the ground. For the next 2 weeks, the village was a hive of activity. Kano organized 20 hunters. They chopped down trees, hauled logs, dug in posts. Artem stood nearby and gave instructions. Deeper here, tighter here. Horizontal crossbeams between the posts. Tie them down with vines. Seal them with clay. Kano commanded the men. Artem oversaw the plan. They didn't talk more than necessary. They weren't friends. They didn't trust each other. But they worked together, because it was in both their interests. Artem knew this was a fragile peace. Kano tolerated the boy as long as the boy was useful and didn't encroach on his territory. If Artem ever became a threat to Kano's authority, an obsidian knife would find his throat that night. But for now, it was working. The wall was growing. Not quickly, but it was growing. 10 days later, the northern side was sealed off. A palisade 1.5 times a man's height. Sharpened tips, clay packed into the gaps. Rough, but sturdy. Not a stone fortress, but enough to hold off spears and clubs. Alongside the wall, Artem began working on what he'd been thinking about since day one. Weapons. Not for attack, for defense. He knew the formula for gunpowder. Saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. 75 to 10 to 15, the classic ratio. He had the coal, good quality charcoal from the furnace. Sulfur. He asked Orn if there was a place where stinking smoke rose from the ground, where it smelled like rotten eggs, where there was a yellow coating on the rocks. Orn thought for a moment. There was, at the hot springs to the west. 2 days' journey. The rocks there are yellow. The water is hot. The air is foul. The tribe doesn't go there. A bad place. Spirits, sulfur, volcanic deposits. The yellow coating on the rocks is sulfur, pure or nearly pure. He made a mental note. 2 days west. Saltpeter, the hardest part. Potassium nitrate. It occurs naturally in caves, in places where organic matter has decomposed, on the walls of latrines. A white coating, crystalline. He asked Tharu if there were any caves nearby, with a white coating on the walls. Tharu thought for a moment. There is a cave, half a day's journey to the southwest. Hunters hide there during the rainy season. The walls are wet, white crystals on the rocks. Saltpeter. Maybe they're just mineral deposits. We need to check. Artem asked Tharu to bring back a sample, a handful of white crystals from the cave walls. Tharu left in the morning with a stick. He returned by evening the next day, limping but satisfied, with a piece of cloth containing the white crystals. Artem unwrapped it. He looked at it. He sniffed it. He licked it. A bitter, salty taste, chilling. It could have been saltpeter, or it could be ordinary salt, or something else entirely. You couldn't tell without a chemical analysis. But there was one test, a simple one. He took a pinch of the crystals, placed them on a flat stone, added a grain of charcoal, held a burning splinter close. A flash, bright, white, with a hiss. Sparks flew in all directions. Lena jumped back. Tharu cursed. Artem stared at the stone. It was empty. The crystals had burned up instantly, with the characteristic flash of an oxidizer. Saltpeter, the real thing. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization of what he'd just found. He had charcoal. There's likely sulfur 2 days' journey away, and now there's saltpeter. 3 components, 3 ingredients that are harmless on their own, but together they change history. Gunpowder. He could make gunpowder. Not now, not today. He needs sulfur. He needs more saltpeter. He needs the right ratio and the right method for mixing and testing. He needed a site far from the village, because the first experiments might end in an explosion, or end in nothing at all if the proportions were wrong. But he knew it was possible, and that knowledge warmed him better than any fire. On the 100th day, a stranger arrived at the village. Not from the Grey Herons, not from the southern clans. A lone man, thin, tall, with long hair tied in a knot, a mask on his face, white, made of bone. Half the mask covered the left side of his face. The right side was exposed. Dark skin, a scar running from his ear to his chin. Calm eyes. The bone mask. The hunters seized him at the gate. They knocked him down. They pressed their spears against his throat. Kano was the first to arrive, a knife in his hand. The stranger offered no resistance. He lay on the ground and spoke calmly. He had come alone, unarmed. He bore a message from the shaman Vekar, a message for the boy who makes white fire. They called for Artem. He came. He looked at the man on the ground, thin, emaciated. He'd been walking for a long time, maybe a week, alone through the jungle. That's not the act of a warrior. It's the act of a messenger. Artem asked Kano to let him go. Kano looked at him with fury. 10 days. Artem divided them into parts. The first 3 days were for sulfur. He sent Tara and 2 hunters to the hot springs in the west. He explained what to look for. Yellow crystals on the rocks. Powder. Gather it in a leather bag. Don't sniff it. Don't taste it. Just bring it back. Tara left without asking questions. She didn't ask why. She saw Artem's face, and that was enough. While Tara was on her way, Artem prepared the rest. Charcoal, the best kind, made from hardwood. He asked Morrow to burn a separate batch in a sealed pit, with no air access. Pure carbon, black, light, crunchy. He ground it into a powder on a stone, as fine as flour. He poured it into a pot. He processed the saltpeter separately, dissolved it in boiled water, strained it through a cloth. He evaporated it. Pure crystals remained at the bottom. Whiter than those from the cave, fewer impurities. He dried them on a stone and ground them into a powder, just as fine. 2 components out of 3. At the same time, he thought about his meeting with Vekar. What to say, how to behave. He knew only fragments about Vekar, a shaman, intelligent, dangerous. He commands 1,000 warriors. He eats people like everyone else in this world. But he draws symbols on the walls, alone, in the dark. That last detail wouldn't leave him alone. A man who draws symbols in solitude is not just a shaman. He is a thinker, perhaps a genius. A genius without an education, without context, without a single person to talk to. He is either the greatest potential ally or the greatest enemy. There is no third option. On the 4th day, Tara returned, with a bag. Inside the bag were yellow stones and powder. Artem opened it. The smell, pungent. Rotten eggs, sulfur. Pure volcanic sulfur. His hands trembled as he poured the powder onto the stone. Yellow, bright. 3 components on a single stone. Coal, saltpeter, sulfur. He knew the proportions. 75% saltpeter, 10% sulfur, 15% coal, classic black powder. He mixed it in a small bowl. Far from the village, behind the hill, alone, no one around. If anything went wrong, he had no right to kill anyone but himself. His hands were wrapped in cloth bandages. His face was covered with a wet rag. Primitive protection, more against the dust than against the explosion. He mixed 3 powders, stirred them with a stick, for a long time, thoroughly. The more uniform the mixture, the more stable the combustion. Gray powder, Unremarkable. A handful of dust on a stone dish. He poured a pinch onto a flat stone, stepped back 5 paces, took a long stick with a smoldering end. He reached out, touched it. A flash, white smoke, a pop, not an explosion, a pop, bright, sharp, loud. The stone remained clean. The powder burned up instantly, without a trace. Artem sat on the ground and looked at the empty stone, and he smiled. Black gunpowder, a laborer, in the Stone Age, on another planet under a white sun. He'd done it. Now for the quantity and the delivery method. Gunpowder alone is useless. He needed a container, a clay pot, sealed, with a fuse, a bomb. Primitive, but effective. Clay shards plus a shock wave plus fire. In a confined space, it's death. In an open field, it's panic. He made 3 pots, small ones, about the size of a fist. He filled them with gunpowder, sealed them with clay and resin, inserted a fuse made of twisted fibers soaked in fat and sulfur. 3 bombs, the first in the history of this world. He hid them in a pit behind a hill. He covered them with earth, placed a stone on top, marked the spot. It was a safety net, in case his meeting with Vekar didn't go as planned, in case the bone masks decided that the talks were over, in case everything fell apart. For the remaining days, he prepared for the meeting in a different way. He made a book, not a real book, clay tablets bound together with a leather cord, 23 tablets, symbols and drawings on each one, a soap recipe, a salt recipe, a diagram of a smokehouse, a diagram of a distillation still, a diagram of a kiln, symbols, the letters of Cassie, a map of the area, a diagram of the field, dosages for medicines. All the knowledge he'd accumulated over 3.5 months on a single cord in a single bundle. He was going to give it to Vekar. Lena found out and came to him that night, white with rage. She said he'd gone mad, to hand over knowledge to the enemy, everything they'd built, everything she'd learned, just hand it over to a man who eats people and wants to destroy their tribe? Artem sat and listened. Then he replied, "Knowledge isn't a weapon in and of itself. People turn it into a weapon. If Vekar gets the knowledge and uses it for war, they'll lose. If Vekar gains that knowledge and realizes that war is no longer necessary, they'll win more than they could ever have dreamed of." Lena looked at him. He continued, "Spear against spear is war. Knowledge against knowledge is a conversation. He wants to start a conversation." Lena was silent. Then she said she'd go with him. Artem shook his head. Alone. That was the agreement. Lena said that in that case, she would wait halfway there, with a torch. If he didn't return before dark, she would set the grass on fire, and the smoke would be seen in the village. Artem looked at her, at the girl with the scorched cheek who, 3 months ago, had sat by the hut waiting to be sacrificed. Now she was devising a rescue plan. No panic, no tears, cool and precise. He nodded. On the morning of the 10th day, he left the village. Naya was standing at the gate. She wasn't crying. She was just watching. He walked up to her, took her hand, said quietly, "He'll come back." Vekar spoke first. He told us that 20 years ago, he had found stones in a cave that burned. Not wood, stones. He didn't know the word coal. He called them sleeping fire. He experimented, alone, at night, while the tribe slept. He mixed the stones with clay and made pots that didn't crack over a fire. He mixed animal fat with the sap of a certain vine and made an ointment that healed wounds faster than any prayer. He discovered that hot water from springs cured abscesses. He didn't understand why, but he saw that it worked. He drew 32 symbols on the wall of his hut. Each one represented an object or an action. He never showed them to anyone, because in his tribe, a shaman's knowledge is sacred. If a shaman speaks, it means the gods have spoken. If a shaman draws symbols, it is the writing of the spirits, not a human endeavor. He lived in solitude on the inside. On the outside, he was a shaman, fearsome, great, one who spoke with Tagar. Inside, he was a man who knew that the gods do not answer, that prayers are empty, that rituals are meaningless, and that the only things that work are these hands and this mind. Artem listened and felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, recognition. He looked at Vekar and saw himself. After 20 years of solitude, without a university, without books, without a single person nearby who would understand, 20 years in the dark, with 32 symbols on the wall. Artem took a bundle of tablets from his shoulder. He placed them between them. He untied the string. He laid the tablets out on the ground. 23 of them. Vekar watched. His eyes moved from tablet to tablet. He couldn't read Artem's symbols, but he saw the structure, the drawings, the diagrams, the proportions marked with sticks. He picked up one tablet, a soap recipe. He ran his finger over the symbols. He looked at Artem. Artem explained, ash, fat, water. Mix, heat. The result is a substance that removes dirt. It removes tiny invisible creatures that cause disease. Vekar listened. He picked up the next tablet, a distillation cube, a diagram. Artem explained, a pot with a lid, a tube, cold water. Steam collects and turns into liquid, pure, which heals wounds. Vekar didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't ask about spirits. He listened the way a scientist listens to another scientist, eagerly, respectfully, with a sense of pain at how much time had been lost. Artem showed him all 23 cards. He explained each one: soap, salt, smoking, pottery, distillation, medicines, symbols, letters, fields, fertilizer, a wineskin, everything. Vekar remained silent for a long time after Artem finished. He looked at the tablets laid out on the ground, 23 pieces of clay, 3.5 months of work, an entire civilization in its infancy. Then he asked, "How do you know this?" Artem didn't answer right away. He thought about it. Should he lie? Say that the spirits had taught him? Or that he dreamed it? Or that he'd found it on the walls of a cave? No. This man deserved the truth, or at least part of it. Artem said, he knows because he remembers. He remembers the place where all of this had already been discovered. A long time ago, by other people. He remembers their discoveries, and he's repeating them here. Vekar looked at him for a long time, intently. Then he said quietly, "The white sun." Artem froze. Vekar continued, "I had a dream, a long time ago, many years ago. Light, white, cold, and a voice. The voice said a number. Not my number, a different one. Vekar didn't remember which one, but he remembered that the voice spoke in a language he didn't know and yet understood." Artem sat motionless. Vekar had also had a dream, a different one, with a different number, but the same voice, the same white sun. So Vekar was also part of something, not like Artem, not transported from another world, but touched, marked, pushed. The white sun didn't just transport Artem, it also nurtured the locals, those who could get there on their own, without being transported, without someone else's memory, just using their own minds. Vekar was one of them, a natural, a diamond in the rough. He'd spent 20 years polishing himself in complete darkness. Artem took a bundle of tablets. He held them out to Vekar. All of them. Every single one. These are yours. Take them. Teach your people. Vekar didn't move. His hands lay on his knees. Then he raised them, slowly, and Artem saw that they were trembling. The large, sinewy hands of the cannibal shaman trembled like a child's. Vekar took the tablets, pressed them to his chest, closed his eyes, and sat like that for a few seconds, motionless, with his eyes closed, with 23 tablets against his heart. Then he opened his eyes, and they were wet. He said, "War. His people want war. 1,000 spears, young warriors who believe in Tagar and thirst for blood. He is a shaman. He can slow them down, but not stop them. Sooner or later, they will march south, toward the Scarlet Fangs, toward the boy with the white fire. He won't be able to prevent it." A year. Artem returned to the village and began to prepare, not for war, but to make war impossible. For the first 3 months after meeting Vekar, he built. A wall encircled the entire village, the entire perimeter, a palisade of thick logs. Kano commanded, Artem planned. 2 gates, north and south, lookout posts at the 4 corners, a knee-deep moat filled with water, pits with stakes in front of the wall, camouflaged with leaves. The village was no longer a village. It had become a settlement. Maruo stood on the lookout platform and looked down at the neat rows of huts and the fields beyond the wall, the smokehouses, the ovens, and the pots of salt. And his old face was inscrutable, but his eyes sparkled. In half a year, the population had grown to 300. Families came from the south and the east. The Grey Herons brought another 20 people. Small clans that had previously hidden alone in the jungle came under the wall's protection. Artem welcomed everyone. Every newcomer was taught 3 things: wash your hands with soap, drink boiled water, learn the symbols. 3 rules: simple, unbreakable. The school grew to 25 students, children aged 8 to 15. Lena taught them. She became a teacher, a real one. Strict, demanding. The children feared her more than they feared Kano, and they loved her more than they loved their mothers, because she gave them what no one else did: a future. There were now 47 symbols. Lena had added half of them. They already covered the basic concepts: numbers, operations, objects, plants, body parts, directions. That was enough to write down a recipe or instructions, a route, a short message. Not literature. Not poetry, practice. Pure, bare practice. Oren worked in the infirmary, a small hut next to Artem's hut. 4 mats, a shelf with pots, ointments, decoctions, alcohol, honey, bandages. She treated patients every day. Cuts, burns, fever, dislocations, bites, colds. She knew the plants, and she knew Artem's methods. She combined them. Plantain ointment in alcohol, a pain-relieving decoction of tom root in precise doses, a mint compress for coughs, honey on wounds, alcohol for the instruments. She saved 2 or 3 people a week, quietly, without rituals, without prayers. She simply treated them. Oro helped her. The old shaman came to the infirmary every day, not as a shaman, as a student, as an assistant. He held the patients while Oren lanced their abscesses. He changed the bandages. He brewed the decoctions. His necklace, made of fingers, lay in a corner of his hut. He didn't wear it anymore. Cassie was working on the language. She remembered 8 more letters, 23 in total, and about 40 words. Artem was matching Cassie's letters with his symbols. building bridges, creating a dictionary. Two languages on the same tablets, the language of the jungle and the language of the city. Cassie told him about Akor in the evenings, bit by bit, like piecing together a broken pot. Stone walls, three-story houses, a market with fabrics, a temple on a hill, priests in white, bronze knives, bronze, metal. There was metal in this world, beyond the mountains. Artem knew that sooner or later he'd have to go there, but not now. Now there's a war. Tara was working. She made 20 water skins, 10 frames for drying hides, bellows for the stove, 3 pairs of leather arm guards for hunters. She didn't stop. Every day, something new, a new idea. She saw Artem stringing a sinew bowstring onto his bow and suggested soaking the sinew in resin. The bowstring became stronger. She saw the distillation still and suggested wrapping the tube in a wet hide for better cooling. Condensation formed faster. She thought with her hands and used those same hands to change the world around her. One evening, she came to Artem's hut, silently. He was sitting by the entrance, branding nameplates. She sat down beside him. She was silent for a long time. Then she pulled a hunting knife from her belt. She placed it in front of him. On the ground, blade pointing toward him. Artem looked at the knife, then at Tara. Her face was calm, her eyes were steady, but a vein was throbbing in her neck, rapidly. He knew what this gesture meant. Kenji's body remembered the customs. The knife's blade pointing away from oneself. An offer, from a woman to a man. He was 15 in this body. She was 22. She was waiting. Artem felt the blood rush to his cheeks. Hot. He was a graduate student. He was 26 in his mind, 15 in his body. His body reacted like a 15-year-old's. His mind reacted like that of a 26-year-old. Both reactions were equally bewildered. He picked up the knife, placed it back on her lap. Not a refusal, not an acceptance. He said quietly, "It's not time yet." She looked at him, nodded, took the knife, stood up, left. No hard feelings, no tears. Tara wasn't the type to take offense. She was the type to wait. 9 months after the relocation, the first rumors reached the village. Slave traders from the eastern rivers. They'd come with goods, hides, shells, 2 bronze beads, and information. They'd heard about the settlement, about soap, about salt, about meat that doesn't rot. They wanted to trade. Artem met them at the gate. 2 men, tall, muscular, iron bracelets on their wrists. Iron. The first iron Artem had ever seen in this world. He looked at the bracelets and felt his heart pounding. Iron. 11 months after the relocation, Artem knew the time had come when he saw the smoke. 3 columns to the north, black, thick, not a forest fire, signal smoke. The bone masks were coming. The messenger had arrived the day before the smoke appeared, not from Vekar, from a young chieftain named Tagan, the grandson of the old chieftain. Young, angry, hungry for glory. He had gathered 1,500 spears and pushed Vekar aside. The shaman no longer controlled the army. The messenger brought a simple message. Hand over the boy with the white fire. We won't touch the rest. Maruo listened, his face ashen. Kano stood nearby, a knife in his hand. The hunter stood behind him, 40 men, armed with spears and bows, against 1,500. Artem stood there, counting. Not the people, but the time. 3 days, maybe 4. That's how long it would take to walk from the signal fires to the settlement. 3 or 4 days to prepare what he had been preparing for the past few months. He replied to the messenger. No. And he added, tell Tagan, let him come himself and see what awaits him. The messenger left. Artem turned to his men and began to speak. Quickly, clearly, every word like a blow on an anvil. The plan had been ready for a long time. He'd thought about it every night, every time his lungs kept him awake. He would lie on his mat and map out in his mind the battle that was meant to end all battles. Not with a victory, with a lesson. First, the pits. Over the past few months, they had dug 12 pits along the northern trail, deep, lined with stakes, camouflaged. The vanguard of the bone masks would be the first to enter them. This would slow them down and terrify them. Second, the ravine. 200 paces north of the wall, the trail passed through a narrow ravine. The walls were steep, the bottom was rocky. Artem had placed pots of gunpowder in the walls of the ravine, 20 of them. The fuses were led to the top and camouflaged. If the army entered the ravine and the fuses were lit simultaneously, the ravine would become a trap. Third, the wall. A palisade. Behind it, archers. Kano had trained them for 3 months. It wasn't anything spectacular, but 20 bows firing from behind cover was a force to be reckoned with. Fourth, fire. Artem made incendiary pots. Oil, sulfur, a rag wick. When hit, the pot shatters, the oil spills, the sulfur flares up. It doesn't kill, but it scares, and it burns, and it smokes, and it blinds. Fifth, he himself. On the hill behind the settlement, with a spyglass made from 2 pieces of polished quartz. 3 months of grinding. The lenses are warped, cloudy, but they magnify 4 times. He'll be able to see the battlefield from above, and, through a chain of messengers, give orders. Where to shoot, when to set fires, who to carry out. 3 days were spent working on it. He slept 2 hours over the entire 3 days. His lungs were on fire. The cough tore at his throat. Blood on the rag had become a frequent sight again. His body was paying the price for every hour he stayed awake, but he couldn't stop. Naya followed him like a shadow. She gave him willow decoction to drink. She fed him. She wiped away the blood. On the 3rd night, she said quietly, "Our son is killing himself." Artem looked at her, at the woman with a fang tattoo across her cheek. The one who, a year ago, had held a dying boy close and whispered his name. Now she stood before him, upright and strong. Clean hands, a clean face, her hair braided, clothes made from fabric sewn by Cassie. A different woman, a different person. He said, "He doesn't kill, he saves. Those are different things." She shook her head, but she didn't argue. On the morning of the 4th day, the lookouts spotted the army. 1,500 spears stretched out across the jungle to the north. Drums, shouts, bone masks gleamed white among the trees like skulls. Artem stood on the hill, the trumpet pressed to his eye. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from exhaustion and the heat that had returned during the night. He watched as the vanguard entered the trail. 100 warriors, swift, confident. They knew the way. They'd walked it many times. They didn't know about the pits. The first one fell in silence. The second one shouted. The third fell next to a pit while trying to stop. Panic, screams. They stopped, regrouped, went around the pits. They lost maybe 10 men and 20 minutes, but fear had taken hold. They moved on, slower, more cautiously. The main force entered the ravine. 400, 500. The ravine was long, narrow, a perfect trap. Artem looked through his binoculars. His hand rose. A messenger waited nearby. Artem lowered his hand. The messenger ran off. Down the chain of command, 3 men. The last one stood by the ropes tied to the fuses. He pulled. The fuses flared up. 20 pots of gunpowder in the ravine's walls. The explosion wasn't like in the movies. No fireball, no mushroom cloud. Bangs. 20 bangs, one after another. A rumble. Rocks flew into the ravine. Shards of clay. Smoke. Thick white smoke filled the ravine in seconds. Screams, shouts, panic. People scrambled about in the smoke, unable to see one another. Rocks fell from above. They didn't kill. Most of them didn't kill, but they maimed, they stunned, they terrified. Artem counted, the ones who weren't killed. Seconds. How long would the panic last? How long until the leaders took control? 1 minute, 2, 3. People began to emerge from the ravine, blackened by soot, dazed, some without weapons, some without masks, just people, frightened people. The main army stood in front of the ravine, 1,500, minus those inside. They heard the explosions. They saw the smoke. They saw their comrades crawling out of the ravine. And they didn't move. The young leader, Tagan, stood at the front. Artem saw him through his spyglass, tall, wearing a large bone mask, holding a spear. He was looking at the ravine, and he didn't move. Artem lowered his spyglass. He looked at the messenger. He said, "Tell Kano, fire incendiary rounds, ahead of the ravine, not at the people, ahead of them. A strip of fire between them and us." The messenger ran off. 3 minutes and 20 seconds later, 20 pots filled with oil and sulfur flew from the wall. They crashed to the ground in front of the ravine. They burst into flames. A strip of fire, smoke, the stench of sulfur. The army of the bone masks stood behind a wall of fire and smoke. Before them lay the ravine from which the wounded were crawling out. Behind them lay the jungle. They could have gone around it. They could have split up. They could have waited for the fire to die down. They could have done many things, but they stood their ground. Because of fear, not the fear of death. They were warriors. They weren't afraid of death. The fear of the unknown. Fire born from clay pots. Thunder without clouds. The earth exploding beneath their feet. This isn't war. This is sorcery. This is the wrath of the gods. Artem knew this pause wouldn't last long. They needed something else. Something that would turn the pause into a decision. He looked at the messenger. "Tell Naya, the torch." Naya was standing at the foot of the hill, with a torch, just as he'd asked, just as they'd rehearsed. She lit the torch, raised it above her head. It was the signal. For Lena, who was standing on the observation deck with a notebook made of tablets. For Oren, who was standing by the gate with a bag of medicine. For Cassie, who was standing next to Oren, with a book, not a clay one, a real one. Leather pages bound together, text written in Cassie's letters and Lena's symbols. The first book. For Tara, who was standing on the wall, with a bow. And for Yumi, who was standing in the middle, between the wall and the line of fire, alone. Yumi. Artem hadn't mentioned her before because there was nothing to say. She had arrived 2 months ago, a spy, Vekar's daughter, 16 years old, icy eyes, short hair, a slave's brand on her wrist, which had never been there because she had never been a slave. Vekar sent her, not to spy, to save. He knew Tegan was coming, knew he wouldn't be able to stop him, and sent his daughter to the only person he trusted, to the boy with the white fire. Artem saw through her on the 3rd day. Not because she was a poor actress, because she knew the 32 symbols, those very ones, from the wall of Vekar's hut, and she'd drawn one absent-mindedly when she thought no one was watching. He didn't expose her. He walked up to her and said quietly, "I know who you are. I know where you're from. You can leave, you can stay. I won't decide for you. Others have been deciding for you for too long." Yumi stood there and looked at him. A second, 2, 10. Then she said, "I'm staying." And she stayed. Now she stood between 2 armies, alone, unarmed. Vekar's daughter, known to every warrior of the bone masks. She stood facing her father's army, the 1,500 people among whom she had grown up, and she remained silent. Tegan saw her. He recognized her. His mask turned toward her. Yumi stood and waited. Then she raised her hand and made the sign. One of the 32. Vekar sign. His sign. His secret. The one he used to draw on the wall in the dark. The army froze. Those who knew Vekar, those who respected him, those who had seen this sign on the walls of his hut without knowing what it meant, they saw it here, on his daughter's arm, in front of the wall of a foreign settlement. Yumi lowered her arm and stepped aside, because Artem had emerged from the settlement's gate behind her, alone, thin, wearing a clean linen shirt that Yumi had woven, with a clay pot in his hands. Artem walked slowly. Every step was a struggle against the pain. His lungs were on fire. His heart was pounding so hard, his ribs were shaking. But he kept walking, steadily, straight ahead, without staggering, without coughing. He had forbidden himself to cough, because an army stood before him, and the army must not see a sick boy, but a man, one who isn't afraid. He stopped 20 paces from Tagan. The young chieftain stood at full height. A bone mask covered his face, a spear in his hand. Behind him stood 1,500 warriors, exhausted, terrified, stunned, but still 1,500. Artem raised the pot. He set it on the ground in front of him. Then he spoke, softly. But the silence was such that every word carried all the way to the back rows. He said he didn't want war. That war is when two tribes strike each other with spears, and then both bury their dead, and nothing changes. That he was proposing something else. He pointed to the pot. He said there was a power inside it that had blown up the ravine, with just one pot. He had many such pots, and tomorrow there would be more than today, and the day after tomorrow, more than tomorrow. Because this wasn't sorcery, it was knowledge, and knowledge grows. Tagan stood and listened. His mask hid his face, but his spear dropped slightly, by 2 fingers. Artem continued. He said he knew Vekar, that he'd spoken with him, that he'd given him everything he knew, 23 tablets, recipes, diagrams, symbols, everything, for free, no strings attached. Because knowledge isn't a weapon. Knowledge is food that grows when you share it. He pointed to the wall behind him. He said there were 300 people behind the wall. Among them were children who could read, a woman who healed wounds without prayers, an old shaman who had stopped believing in spirits and started believing in soap, a hunter who built walls, a slave girl who remembered the letters from the city beyond the mountains, Vekar's daughter who chose to stay, and a mother, his mother, who boiled the first bar of soap in the history of this world. He said that all of this could be destroyed. 1,500 spears would be enough. They'd climb over the wall, trample the fields, smash the pots, burn down the school, kill the children who can read. They could. But why? So they'd starve again in a year? So the children would die again from red rot? So the meat would rot again in 2 days? So they'd once more drag the weak to the stone of a goddess who doesn't hear them. Or they could do things differently. He bent down. He opened the pot. There was no gunpowder inside. Inside lay 3 things: a bar of soap, a handful of salt, and a book. That very one. The first book of this world. Leather pages, Lena's symbols, Cassie's letters, a name on the cover. Lena. Because she created this language, not Artem. She did. Artem took out the book. He held it out. Not toward Tagan, past Tagan, over there, into the crowd. From the back rows, a tall, thin man without a mask was slowly stepping forward. Vekar. He was walking through his own army. The warriors parted, silently. He walked past Tegan. The young chieftain turned toward him. He opened his mouth. Vekar didn't look at him. He walked over to Artem. He stood facing him. Two thin men, one tall and old, the other short and young. Between them, a pot of soap and salt. Artem held out the book. Vekar took it. He opened it. The first page. 14 of Artem's symbols, 6 of Lena's symbols, 15 of Cassie's letters. An explanation beneath each one. A drawing. A sound. Vekar didn't see the second page because he stopped at the first one. Artem watched as his eyes moved across the symbols, slowly, one by one, and he saw the moment when Vekar saw one of the symbols and recognized it. A stick with a hook. That's how Lena had drawn the symbol for fire, and exactly the same symbol, the very same, identical. It was on the wall of Vekar's hut, one of 32, drawn in the dark, all by himself, 20 years ago. Two people at opposite ends of the jungle, unaware of each other, drew the exact same symbol for the exact same word. Because fire is fire, and the human brain draws it the same way, everywhere, always. Vekar's hands were trembling. Artem saw it. 1,500 warriors saw it. Tagan saw it. The shaman of the bone masks stood before the boy with white fire, and his hands trembled over the open book. The silence was so thick you could hear the crackling of the dying strip of fire behind Artem's back. Vekar raised his head. He looked at Artem, and Artem saw in his eyes what he had seen only once before, in Naya's eyes, when she first saw the smooth skin on her own hands. Vekar closed the book, pressed it to his chest, turned toward the army, toward the 1,500 warriors, toward Tagan with his spear and mask, and began to speak. Loudly. So loudly that the back rows could hear every word. He said that the gods were silent, that Tagar had never once answered him in his entire life, that the stones on which they slaughtered their captives were just stones, that strength does not come from the enemy's flesh. Strength comes from this. He raised the book. Strength comes from knowledge, written down, preserved, passed on. Knowledge that does not die with its bearer. Knowledge that lives on clay and leather and stone. This is strength. And the boy behind him had already shown what it can do. Soap, salt, water that heals, fire that shatters the earth. And he is ready to share it. With everyone. For free. No strings attached. Tagan stood there. His spear trembled. He could strike. He could kill Vekar. He could give the order, and 1,500 spears would pierce the boy and the shaman in seconds. But behind Artem stood a wall, and on the wall stood Tara with her bow, and Kano with the hunters. And beyond the wall lay a moat, and the wounded still lay in the ravine. And Yumi stood between the armies, looking at Tagan through the eyes of Vekar's daughter. And 1,500 warriors stood behind Tagan, and not a single one of them raised a spear. Because they saw the ravine. They saw the fire. They saw smoke. And they saw their shaman holding a book with trembling hands. And they didn't understand what was in it, but they sensed it. Something was changing. Right now. Right here. The world they knew, the world of spears and stones and altars and spirits, that world was cracking at the seams, and light was seeping out of the cracks. Strange, incomprehensible, frightening, but light. Tagan lowered his spear. He didn't throw it, he lowered it to the ground. the tip into the ground. Then he took off his mask. Beneath it was a young face, 20 years old, maybe 22. Scars, tired eyes. He looked at Artem, then at Vekar, then at the book, and he said one word. Show me. Artem exhaled. His legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees, not from weakness, although from weakness too, because something inside him had let go, something that had been clenched so long and so tightly that he'd forgotten what it felt like when it finally released. Tara leaped over the wall. She ran up to him. She scooped him up in her arms like a child and carried him toward the gate. He pressed himself against her shoulder and looked up at the sky. The white sun hung above them, round, motionless, like an eye. It seemed to him that it had blinked. Naya was waiting at the entrance to the hut, with hot water and his own soap. She took him from Tara's arms, laid him on the mat, washed his face, his hands, his chest, with warm water, with soap she had made herself, the first soap in the history of this world. He lay there and looked at her, at the woman who had been beaten her whole life, at the woman who made soap and carried a torch, at the woman who had never once heard the word thank you until he spoke it. He said, "Thank you, Mom." She froze. Then she continued washing him, because that was what she knew how to do, and what mattered. That night, Artem had the dream again, a white light, silence, and a voice. The same voice. You've made it. Artem stood in the white light, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid. The voice said, 17 before you tried to change the world by force, with armies, with empires. They built quickly and fell even faster, because they built for themselves. You built for your mother, for the girl with the burned cheek, for the old man with the sore leg, for the child with the stick in his mouth. That's why you made it. Artem asked, "Who are you?" The voice replied, "It doesn't matter. What matters is what comes next. Beyond the mountains, a city awaits you. In the city, a temple. In the temple, a wall. On the wall, 17 names, crossed out. The 18th name, not crossed out. Find it, and we'll have a real talk." The light went out. Artem woke up. Dawn, a hut, the smell of soap and smoke. Voices behind the wall, many voices. Not screams, conversations. People were talking, calmly, without fear. He stepped out of the hut. Tents stood in a clearing in front of the settlement. The bone masks. Not all 1,500 of them, maybe 100, maybe 200. The rest had gone back north, but these ones stayed. They sat by the campfires and looked at the wall, at the fields beyond it, at the smoke rising from the smokehouses, at the children running by the gate. Vakar walked among them, with a book in his hands. He was pointing to pages. He explained, one symbol at a time. His warriors listened, silently, with the same expression with which Naya had looked at her clean hands a year ago. Artem stood by the gate and watched. Lena stood nearby, with a notebook. She was already taking notes. The names of the newcomers, what they could do, where they came from. Oren stood nearby, with a bag of medicine. She was already examining the wounded from the ravine, her enemies, who yesterday had wanted to kill her and everyone she knew. She was treating them, silently, but calmly, because a wounded person is a wounded person, not an enemy, not a friend, a person who is in pain. Cassie stood nearby. She was looking east, at the mountains. Artem knew what she was thinking about. A whore. Home. Letters. Her mother baking flatbread. Tara stood nearby, with a bow on her back. She wasn't looking at the army. She was looking at Artem. And her eyes were calm. She was waiting. She knew how to wait. Yumi stood nearby, between two worlds, just as she had stood yesterday, just as she would always stand, belonging to no one, and therefore belonging to everyone. Oro stood nearby, without his necklace, without his paint, an old man with wrinkled hands and clear eyes. He looked at Artem and spoke softly so that only he could hear. Maruo, the gods are gone. A man has come. Artem stood and looked at the world he had been building for a year. 300 people behind the wall, 200 in front of the wall. Fields, smokehouses, a school, an infirmary, ovens, pots, signs, a book. The first book, with a name on the cover. Lena. He looked at the white sun, hanging in the sky, motionless, watching. And for the first time, he thought not about what it wanted from him, but about what he wanted from himself. He wanted his mother to live to a ripe old age, in a house with heated floors, and to see grandchildren who could read. He looked at Naya. She was standing behind him, her hand on his shoulder, just like a year ago, as always. He placed his hand on hers, thin, childlike, on her hand, clean, strong. And he said, "Mom, we need to go east, beyond the mountains." She replied, "Then let's go." He smiled, turned to his people, to his world, and said, "Let's get to work."